So I'd like to hear from everyone that read the book, if it was your first time reading it, just to give us what your initial reaction was to the book, just to start with an overview. George, I'm
I
going to
have to
figure out.
here, I think, yeah.
The stage is yours.
Invite to speak.
There
Oh,
you
there you
are.
go. That's fun.
Where
Hi
is he?
everyone.
Hey, there he is. Hi, George.
Yes, hey. Yeah, this is my first time reading it, and I got to say, I wasn't like I was expecting violence, of course, being like one of the most quote unquote violent books of all time, but
Yeah.
I I just couldn't expect how existential and like metaphysical the book would turn. Like
Yeah.
it become like become like that's like imagine like corpses being raped and like babies has been fucking stomped, but it's like that part's like really meditative and like just like during the war is God monologue from the judge in chapter I think 16. I don't remember. After he said it, I just had to like take a break and go get a cup of water because like what the fuck he said war is God. like like yeah, like the pros like really impressed me, like the teams really impressed me. I want to reread it but in English. I read it in Portuguese only. Meridiano de
Of
Sangue.
course. Yeah. I mean, how
Oh.
was it? I mean, for you and obviously for anyone else, how was it when? Because we've read the book obviously multiple times now, but there is something about I find that visceral reaction of just how much the violence just keeps continuing and it goes on, and it doesn't seem to
Mhm.
have a point where you think that this is going to end.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, but yeah, it was like really disturbing. Chapter 4 is when I finally like got to why how the book got this like reputation as for violence. It was the what's the name of the tribe? The Comanche battle, right?
Yeah.
It was the Comanches that initially I thought like the white men were doing all the like really crazy stuff. Like it was actually Comanches, and that ties into one thing you were seeing on the video. I'm 2 hours in only. That like how like permanent violence is throughout the history of humanity. Whereas it's like direct attacks, like classical, like it's like just war and colonialism, or even when you're quote unquote defending yourself. It
Mm,
was yeah, that really shook me up.
yeah. Cool. I mean, I do find that I know that a lot of people really have struggled with the violence of it, but for me, like the biggest take that I've always had away from the book is just that interweaving of it because it's the way that he shows this very uncompassionate, very direct manner of how he addresses violence as what it is. And then at the same way, it's just I know that people often get confused about what McCarthy's perspective is because he also beautifies a lot of things and he finds beauty in the mundane and beauty in the violence and beauty in
Mhm.
nature. And I've always really enjoyed how those two things kind of they don't parallel one another. But he just weaves this tapestry where I think I don't know if you got up to it in the analysis that we made, but Luiza was always describing it as though you're constantly in a haze, like everything just feels very dreamlike.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a vibe for you, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, by all means, if anyone else also, because we want everyone to be able to speak as much as they want. So if anyone else wants to come, say anything about what George said, anything about what we've said, feel free. Like the stage is open here for everyone. But go on. So Louise is also here, and
Yeah, I've been quiet. I'm just listening. So wait, let's invite
who we got?
Esteban.
Esteban.
It's nice because
Come
we can
come
go
join
one
us.
person at a time. It's actually this.
Hey Esteban.
Hey guys, yeah. So yeah, just like George, this was also my first time reading the novel, and of course I've heard about it for many years, particularly because of its content. It's very violent content within the novel. So of course, when people describe it in that with its extremities, of course, that came with specific expectation, and definitely, I think after finishing the entire book, yeah, I think yeah, I can confidently say yeah, the expectations were definitely met on that front, and overall, I think it was quite a harrowing and very visceral novel just to read in the descriptions of what happens and just the journey that the kid goes on with the gang, and particularly just with the very pure, enigmatic presence of the judge. But I think what really surprised me with how, and what I was very happy with when I finished it and was thinking about the whole story was that even though it is shows violence that is incredibly extreme, I also think by the end there was a sense of hope that I felt in a very twisted, odd, unconventional way. Even though it felt very bleak, I also did feel I had a bit of relief by the end in a strange way. I think the reason why I think because I got that feeling, like it just reaffirmed of just how really it wasn't just something for shock value. It was something that wanted to McCarthy wanted to showcase a very emotionally poignant and powerful story, and I think he succeeded at that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said it gave you a hopeful reaction. I've just seen Kinotherapy Gordon. He's just said the infant scene gave him a visceral reaction on his first read, and we've also got Edward, who I'm also going to invite. So Edward, feel free to where is he? There he is. Yep, feel free, Edward. Stage is yours.
Can you hear me? Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hello everybody. This is actually and real quick, if I start ranting, just tell me to shut up because I'm a tangent talker.
That's okay.
This is my second time reading the book. When I first read it, I went into it like pretty cold. It was suggested to me, but I really knew nothing about it. And it reading it this time, it hit me pretty hard. Being unaware of it the first time, the boy going off to the west like so many did, I went off to the west when I went there. I left where I'm from the Midwest in the United States. Just a lot of parallels in my own life, so on and so forth. And when I went there, I went further west up into Alaska when I first read this book. So it was the middle of winter, cold, barren, windy, dark, like relentlessly dark. And I had like the most difficult time reading this book. And I mean, obviously because of the horrors in it and the violence in it was very off-putting, unsettling. And I was immensely relieved for some reason not too long ago when I heard that Harold Bloom had like a very difficult time reading this book the first two times he attempted to read it. Because
Yeah.
I felt like such a literary like imbecile or somebody who just didn't have the stomach for it. But I got through it and missed a whole lot of it, like missed a lot that was in this book because I felt like I had to trudge through it. And this second reading, I mean, there are times where it feels exactly like what he describes: the endless traveling, the endless desert, the endless death, the endless dreariness. And I guess I just like each read heavily feel that as I'm wading through that. But the gosh, there's too much I could say. I also had no knowledge on tarot at that time, and this time over the 8 years that have passed, I had more knowledge. So this book hit me a lot harder this time. Like I just finished it yesterday, and it emotionally hit me, and I'm like I'm into chapter 11 of your deep dive into it. And oh my gosh, I did not expect to be so blown away by this book, by Cormac, by this world, by these illusions. And Luiza, you said it like so well. If you do not pay attention to this book, you will miss a lot.
Yeah.
And I had to go back several times. I'm like, how did you not read this? How did you miss this? Every time that you went over this, there's a lot here. This time for me is where I totally agree how masterfully written this book is.
It's interesting you said that as well because for me, like the first time I read, it was like the violence I didn't process the violence like I should have, and then reading more and more, like more times, then the violence gets worse and worse. I think the more you can read between the lines as well or what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like to reject the idea that there's any bit of violence inside of me, and reading that causes you to confront that dark shadow that anyone could be incubating inside of them. And it's like almost like a disavowing of like, there's no way I am this. There's no way I'm like this. I can't believe that this nation was made this way, or any nation, any colonized place was made this way. And I heard someone speaking about this, that like that some people enjoy this book because they're like, oh man, I'd love to go back to that time, that final frontier, and to, I'm like, why would you want that? Why would you want to engage in that? Why? And I don't know how I would be in that time period. I probably would have died. I probably wouldn't have had the stomach for it. But real quick too, like Alaska, where I lived, like it was considered the last frontier. So reading that there and not being aware, like just it sinking in many years later in my return down to the lower 48. I could say so many more things, and later on if I have the chance I will. But yeah, that's it for now.
That's cool. That's cool. It's always interesting when it comes to literature or any art piece, the perspective that people have when they are directly from that place, and the nuances that are missed up on it. But I agree with you as well. I find that the first time that you read the book, I've always felt that it's just an onslaught. And because of McCarthy's writing style, that he will, within a very small paragraph, you will completely move location and encounter this travesty, which in any other book would be the core theme of it. And he just moves someone on from it because there's so much going on that on multiple readings, you are able to catch all those things that you missed, much more than a lot of other books that I've read, actually. But to also add a couple more people to this conversation, I know we've got Jay has been waiting for a while, and then Space Cowboy, you'll be next. But I'll bring in Jay first so that he can have his say. Jay, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I don't have much to add. I just wanted to balance out people excited about the book. I'm really excited about talking about this book, but I'm not super excited about the book itself, as much as others. Like, I think it's really good and it's masterpiece and it's great and stuff, but the themes that are raised, I've been thinking about for the last couple of years by myself. So when I was reading this book, I was already quite aware of the violence of the world and violence of the people. We talk about this with my partner a lot, that we think that most of the people are maybe not evil, but inclined to violence and inclined to things like this. So I'm super excited to talk about this. And it was my first read, and I was like, oh yeah, this is right up my alley, something I'm thinking about. And it's really nice to have more people to think about and see how other people reacted, and what are the thoughts behind people saying that it's hopeful. Like I think Luiza mentioned that, Esteban mentioned that, and I think more people mentioned that there is hope at the end, and I'm not really sure about that. Like I'm not saying it's more pessimist, but I'm thinking that okay, there is some hope by myself, but I'm not sure author put any hope in there. So I'm really curious to see what people see by hope. And I'm also curious what Kinotherapy mentioned about that the thought of people, I think Edward mentioned and Kinotherapy commented this, about people thinking about going back, about people excited about going back in the time where you can, I don't know, indulge in violence or in chaos or whatever. Just those topics are interesting.
Yeah. We can make that our first thematic point about this idea of hope and hopelessness, because I don't think it's hopeful at all. But we've got another person to bring in. Where is he? Space Cowboy. It's all yours.
Okay, hold on. Wait, because I have push to talk, and give me a second.
No worries.
Okay, hello.
No, you can stay on the stage, Jay, by the way, if you want. You can either stay or leave it. The choice is yours, to be honest.
I just the note that we cannot raise the hand again. So it's pretty much you raise the hand once and then you enter the conversation and then you're in this like in clap.
Yeah. So like
I can just turn on my microphone and it becomes what it was before.
So, yeah, I thought it was going to be like a little thing that we can go back and forth. But if you want to leave the stage, you can. If you want to stay on, then feel free.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see how it goes.
All right. Space Cowboy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, good.
I first want to say that I watched your video kind of like mindlessly while I was working and everything. And I think your video is some of the best material on Blood Meridian that is like on YouTube. It's excellent
Thank you.
literary analysis, and it'll probably. It's funny because I think the two most popular things of Blood Meridian on YouTube for the next for the coming years are going to be yours and Wendy Goon's video that are both like 6 hours long. So there's a lot of material out there for people to get excited about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to get.
Well, I'm glad that people are engaging with it a lot more. I mean, it's interesting because like just very recently, I think probably this year, the book for some reason like entered the zeitgeist. I don't know why.
I saw a news story, I think, that was it the Texas Library or whatever that had like 12,000 copies of it. As of like 2021 had 100,000 copies of it. So
Wow.
they've had to keep like selling it. So yeah, as a I guess it might be a sign of the times with people
Yeah.
being like maybe a little bit more critical of the United States and US history, just one of the many things you can get out of this book. But let me rush deeper into what I kind of want to say. This is my second read. And my first read came about 8 years ago. And as you guys probably know from me talking about the literature chat, that I'm a big William Faulkner fan.
Yeah.
And obviously so is Cormac McCarthy. And not just for sort of the criticisms of America, but for like this deep prose where these characters may and these descriptions happen so much that you even like lose your place in them, you know? And the prose, I will say that McCarthy's prose I think is more beautiful, and ironically enough. And but what's important is like hidden beneath all of them is so much emotion and content. You know, the prose, there's not a sentence that's wasted in in any of the prose of the novel. And by content I mean just like food for thought.
Yeah.
You know, and while I was reading it, I obviously like I couldn't help both the first time and this time. You cannot help but think of Moby Dick. It
Yeah,
is
yes.
off the footnotes of Moby Dick completely, and I hope we talk more about the judge and nature and his opinions of the natural world because that's what I really think is the thematic center of the book. And the other thing that I can't help but thinking is who Faulkner was a disciple of, which is Joseph Conrad in The Heart of Darkness. I
Yes.
think this book ultimately, the inheriting of the Heart of Darkness, is another big thing that the book deals with in its own sort of way, which is which from your Apocalypse Now video, which I don't know if it's still around or not. I know that you have this sort of the literary common opinion of what it means to inherit the heart of darkness, which is to accept evil and atrocity as part of the human condition, not that it actually is let's say badness or extraordinary, but it is ultimately human. It is ultimately part of the natural world to do what we consider atrocious and evil. And I think that's thematically very similar to where he ends up here. So those two sources, I couldn't help but thinking throughout reading the entire book these first two times, and your analysis kind of put me on the Paradise Lost uh, allusions, because as Cormac has said, books are made of other books, and those were the ones that I was thinking while reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Blood Meridian and just with his writing style, I think with the prose, because he's trying to encapsulate so much within what he's talking about, I think that he doesn't try and disguise the fact of what his references are. I think he really boldly wears them. within the prose. But I saw, George, you had a very, very creative way of including yourself back in the conversation, which none of us thought of, which was to literally raise your hand. So by all means.
It's about the this resurgence of the book, quote unquote. It's because I'm not too sure about the theory now, but I think it's because there is a lot of rumors that Hollywood is finally going to adapt the book into a movie.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's really good take.
It's the guy, I can't remember the guy, but it's the guy that directed Blonde, who also
Andrew Dominic.
directed. Yes, and he also directed the Jesse James film, wasn't it?
Is it him?
The
Yeah.
assassination of
Is that who
Jesse
it's attached?
James
I
by
thought
the
who was
coward
attached
Robert
was
Ford.
I thought it was the
Yeah.
guy that did the road.
I thought it was Hilco, the guy who made the road.
How am I getting him confused?
Because
Everyone's been attached to the
Maybe
movie.
just because he just made a Western film back
Yeah.
then.
yeah.
I just probably assumed that, it must be someone who is familiar with Westerns. Why wouldn't it be him? But no, I'm dead wrong. Completely ignore me. We have another person who wants to come in. Bryan, how are you? Where is he? There he is.
Hello there. Hello, everyone. So
Hi.
I'm going to keep this brief because, unfortunately, I have not finished the book. I'm only up to
Oh my god.
I'm sorry. I'm the slowest reader on earth, and I've been super
It's okay.
busy. And I'm up to chapter 16. But
Okay.
I just want to give my thoughts to what I feel about it so far. It is very dense, and I do feel like I am missing a lot. This is my first time reading it, by the way. I do feel like I'm missing a lot. But I'm getting through it. But I this is the way I kept explaining it to my wife. I was like, I feel like it's very psychedelic in a way. The way it's written, how everything is explained on what is it given the same weight almost. You know what I mean? The violence, the traveling through nature, through the desert and stuff. It's I almost feel like I become desensitized to the violence after a while.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel it. Oh, the judge just threw 2 dogs into the river. Oh, okay. And then I just keep going through it, and at least that's what I'm getting from it right at the moment. I feel like it's very the best way I could describe it is psychedelic. That's why I said the original cover is the Salvador Dali anthem card, and what's it called? And it feel like the painting's molding man and nature and everything into one thing. It's for me, it's putting everything onto the same plane. It's all intertwined, the nature and the violence. That's why I feel like he spends so much time describing the landscapes and everything, just as much as he does the violence. Is he's trying to say it's inherent.
Yeah.
To our nature, to our man. What's it called? I could go. I don't want to go into the judge yet, but I feel like he embodies that.
Yeah, he does definitely. I agree.
I think he's trying to say we're born evil. I think that's what's it called? Cormac McCarthy's stance on it, that everyone's born evil or with this evil within them, and we have to get away from it. But without going too much into the judge, that's my initial reaction to the book.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, if you think it's psychedelic, I mean, the final scene might reaffirm that.
Yeah.
We're probably going to speak about it because it is quite inevitable because of how, I don't know what the right word would be, but how enigmatic the ending is. And even if we speak about it, I don't necessarily think it will spoil anything for you, and we will speak about it. But we have now someone else who's going to join this filling stage. Rebecca,
Hello.
come join us.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. This is my first time reading the book. This is my first time reading any Cormac McCarthy at all. And I will definitely be engaging with a lot more, because I had no idea that his prose was like this. I guess I'd heard his name from, I'd heard him kind of I guess in relation to The Road, because I'd heard of him as a dystopian writer, and I didn't realize that. I don't know. I was just very struck by how dense the prose was in this novel, and I mean, and completely relentless in its horror, obviously. But one thing that I found really bizarre at first was these little titles in the chapter headings. I found that quite unexpected, and I didn't think. I was like, oh, that seems a bit cheap or odd. But then the way that it sets up each chapter is actually, I found it quite remarkable. I'd never seen that before in a novel either, but it meant that the horrific violence to come was anticipated and really quite brought up like a sickness in that anticipation in me. Because you're just like, oh God, is this coming out? I almost stopped reading them at a point because I just didn't want to know, because even already in the prose you know that horror is coming because it's just weaved into every element of everything, especially the descriptions of the landscape, which is why I put my hand up at first because Bryan mentioned it. There was a passage like as soon as where is it? Chapter 4, I think. And he says, they rode on, and the sun in the east flushed pale streaks of light, and then a deeper run of colour like blood seeping up in sudden reaches flaring planewise, and where the earth drained up into the sky, and at the edge of creation the top of the sun rose out of nothing, like the head of a great red phallus, until it cleared the unseen rim, and sat squat and pulsing and malevolent behind them. And I read that, and I was just like, oh my God, like this desert is just like it's like a pulsing wound in itself, and like that just that was my first like shock of amazement in the beauty of this prose, and continued throughout.
I think that's one of the elements of the violence within it, because even when McCarthy and even when the characters aren't surrounded by violence, you just feel its presence in the way that he writes. Even if he is beautifying something, there's something incredibly malevolent, and as though we are just constantly barreling towards something, even when we're surrounded by nothingness. It just feels as though there's this aura of an omnipresence of this kind of thing.
I find it interesting that you said that the titles felt cheap in a way, like the presence of them prior to like the chapter reading, because it's a very common trope in westerns, old western books, to have those chapters like that. But I think in a way he's transgressing that. He's transgressing flipping upside down and making it so that they are almost literal the materiality of the violence that's gonna come. I think he breaks down with that expectation, and I really also really like that about the book.
Yeah, completely. I managed to see that as I was reading it further, but on that first page on chapter 1, I was thinking, what is this? It's like a play.
Yeah. But it's a
I
good
didn't
type
know
of
that about Western books. That's why. Do you know why they were like that in the Western books?
I think it was just the classic serialized form. Because the way that people ingested them before, they were kind of like light reads,
like
and
entertainment,
that was a way to attract people initially, where you can just get a glimpse and see, okay, this book kind of is about this, or it's in this location, and that was the way back in the day that you would attract readers.
Oh wow! So he's like the tradition of them is to engage people.
Yeah, but the irony is that Cormac McCarthy is giving you a list of some of the most horrific things, and that's what's going to keep you invested in the book.
Yeah, wow, that's a really fantastic subversion.
Yeah, but I've got a couple
of people. Yeah,
Gordon, you're first on the list to come back on the stage. If he's coming back, where are we?
Yeah, he should be.
He should be popping on. Oh, there he is.
There he is.
I had to hit the button. All right. Hi. So this is my second time reading the book. I don't exactly remember what made me want to read it the first time. I think I was sort of interested in Cormac McCarthy because he had written No Country for Old Men and The Road. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's sort of a legend around Blood Meridian, the fact that it's like this really famous book and people have tried to adapt it into a film. And yeah, something about this book just called to me, and I'm like, this sounds interesting. I gotta read it. And Yeah, I definitely remember being very taken up by the bleak atmosphere and the disturbing violence. And yeah, McCarthy's writing style, just this ominous character of the judge, and just people trying to figure out who he is and what he represents. Um, but yeah, something that I put in the comments about like I had a very visceral reaction in one of the scenes in which the Delaware smashes an infant on a rock.
Yeah.
I vividly remember reading that and like looking away when I read that, like mid sentence. I was just like, oh, which is very weird to do for a book because like you do that for movies, but like a book you just stop reading. But like I remember like wincing and like having to put my book down when I read that. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh, geez, like I just there's something so just the image of that like but yeah something and then something I was reminded of reading it this time, which anyone reading the book for the first time will notice. One of the most peculiar things about it is there's very little punctuation, most notably in the dialogue. There's no quotation marks around what the characters are saying, and there's a few interpretations you can have to that. When I first read it, I thought like maybe it's the dialogue is running into the descriptions of nature, and maybe it's making a point of that these characters are just a part of nature and they are just doing what they are made to do. That violence and evil just runs in their blood. Um, Another way I thought of it is perhaps there's no these characters have no agency because I remember for some reason like in my memory I thought like oh McCarthy has a very like cold way of writing. He doesn't go into descriptions. But I read it again and I'm like, oh, I'm dead wrong about that because he goes into great detail personifying this desert as a living, breathing hell.
Yeah.
The reason I thought that though was because he never describes the characters' thoughts or feelings. We don't really even know their personalities very well,
Yeah.
unless you want to say this is their personality. But regardless, yeah, he never like really describes what they're like, what they're going through. Um, and again, it could just be their nature, but it's also like these characters don't really have any agency. They're controlled by destiny. Um,
Yeah.
there's a Werner Herzog film I watched again recently called Heart of Glass, and in that movie, he hypnotizes actors to make them just feel like they were under a spell in a trance, and you might be able to apply that to this book. That like these characters are just sort of doing what they're predestined to do. Like they like it brings into that question like are they in control? Who is in control? And yeah, is this are they just doing what is widely accepted? And yeah, I also love the way it sort of demythologizes the Old West. Because yeah, I used to love westerns when I was younger. I used to watch a lot of classic movies, and yeah, this is a great way. The fact that this book is a revisionist western is very crucial to the themes of the film because the West was sort of seen as like the American myth,
Yeah.
and especially something like Manifest Destiny and all that. So yeah, it's definitely yeah, so it's very it is sort of demythologizing America, which a lot of other pieces of media have done, like Assassination of Jesse James, which we mentioned earlier, is a film I love. But yeah, this one does it in such an existential and harrowing way. Like instead of just going like, "Oh yeah, your heroes were bad," it just goes, it just like it doesn't condemn one single hero; it condemns all of humanity.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a very yeah, that's a very interesting way of demythologizing America.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think that that's a an integral part of the book that this demythologization aspect of it, but the judge himself is almost a myth. But what we'll do is there's 3 people waiting to speak at the minute, so I'm going to bring them in one by one. So it's Space Cowboy, then Bryan, then Jason, and what we'll do, we'll just get those points across, and we'll try and get a theme going about a specific theme of the book, because I want to hear what people have to say. So I'll just bring in you 3 first. So Space Cowboy, you're coming in.
Invite sent.
Invite sent.
Yes, he got.
Yep.
Hi, I've come back. I exited and raised my hand again. I don't know if you wanna normalize that, but just instead of speaking over everybody when I have something to say. The first thing that I wanted to come out and mention, maybe it's something that we could talk about later on thematically, is well, I'm not a big fan of the Rhodes adaptation, which is by John Hillcoat. Not that it's bad, I just think that the novel is so vastly superior, and you really get more of this carry the fire, this idea of perseverance. But instead of turning that into a conversation, that's more of me saying that I think that Blood Meridian is not adaptable. And I don't think anybody would ever make a good adaptation of this novel, just because, number one, the voice is where, we've been talking about his prose, and how it's golden prose. You know what I mean? It's like the only person I think that has put sentences more satisfyingly to me is someone like David Foster Wallace, and not even his fiction, but like in his essays, like Consider the Lobster. He has this golden tongue, and a lot of the satisfaction comes from this voice. And the other thing is that it's both the sheer amount and the activities displayed, the violence that you need to display for this film, the violence towards children, the violence towards animals. It's like I don't think audiences would really go for it, and I don't like, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think any filmmaker really has the in Spanish we say ganas, as a polite way of saying balls, to put what is in there on screen, and that's just a surface level thing, you know what I mean? And the other thing was with regard to punctuation, which the only other time I've seen someone not use quotations for rhythm is if you've ever read James Joyce's Ulysses, especially at the beginning, where they're talking about they have a funny conversation about the Jews controlling Europe and stuff. But I think throughout most of the book there's Joyce famously said that if you construct your sentences right, you don't need grammar, something along those lines. I think Cormac McCarthy is kind of like in that same camp, where he's like, the grammar is so limiting to the page, and I want to maintain my rhythm, so I'm not going to use punctuation. I think he's kind of like falling into that school. That's where I would say that comes from. It's very different from most other novels you read.
Yeah, there's a really interesting interpretation though as well. I like that. I think that's actually very relevant. I haven't thought about that as much. I might have to ponder on that a bit longer, because that's very convincing. Bryan, you're in, and I believe you wanted something to say as well.
Yeah, we already moved past this, but I raised my hand to talk about the scene headings and stuff like that. I always took it as all this is like fated to happen to these characters. Like they're on a predestined path and stuff like that. I had no idea it was I guess a trope in old westerns and stuff. This was like the first time I had seen something be done like that. Besides in Godard's Vivre sa vie, he does that.
Yeah.
What was it called? But what else? The other point I wanted to make. I guess for adapting the book into a film, I think the hardest part would be the main character. I know everyone says it's the child or whatever, but I feel like we go like chapters without him even being mentioned. If I'm not.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? So I mean, it's not that it can't be done, but it would just be interesting how they pulled it off. And film that I was thinking about the most when reading this was Jodorowsky's El Topo. I don't know why,
Interesting.
but it kept popping into my head. Maybe because I'm getting like the psychedelic Western, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the violence and the nudity and like and like how I think Luiza was saying in the breakdown. I saw a little bit of the breakdown. I didn't read it all. How like nudity is like used in different ways in this book. Like it could be used in a freeing way or like and like what's the other word I'm looking for? Like a degradative way, I guess is the best way I could put it. He does that. Hodorowski does that in El Topo too, like with the little boy,
That's
like
true.
innocent and free, and then later when one of the girls is like dressed down, it's humiliating and stuff like that. So I don't know. That kept popping into my head as I was reading this.
Yeah.
I think there's a heritage that comes from classical art that both McCarthy and Jodorowsky are dialoguing with, because nudity in classical painting, I mean, it's just part of the natural aspect of painting. We don't really get titillated or embarrassed when we see nudity in fine art, right? We tend to just appreciate it as almost like divine beauty, and I think McCarthy is playing with this idea as well.
Yeah, I also think in relation to that, because it's those things where it is like in communication with the divine, but a lot of this novel is still about that battle between the divine and the material world that we live in, and and at what point does one supersede the other?
Yeah.
I've just invited two people. Jason, you were first.
I have two.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this was my second time reading the book, and one of the things that struck me this go around is while there's clear Anglo-American influences within the book, I couldn't help but spot a lot of German influences throughout as well. I mean, other than the fact that characters speak German, know German, a lot of nods throughout the book to 18th and 19th century German naturalists and writers. There's nods to Goethe. There's nods to Thomas Mann, who was later. But also too, you know, there's some people try to talk Judge Holden up to being like a Nietzschean figure. I think that's kind of not that strong. I think some of that is there. The title of the book, Blood Meridian. Meridian suggests like the zenith of or the peak of the sun, right? And the rising sun and Zarathustra, that's the truth rising and basically blasting the earth with its truth. And there's a section in Zarathustra about this period of high noon where Zarathustra goes into this tree and is kind of basking in this time of truth before he goes and heads out. So it's like this story where it takes place where it's the Southwest, but at the same time it's almost like it's a surreal enclosed world that seems detached from everything else. It's like it's in this kind of eternal truth, or at least like Judge Holden might see it that way as well. It's a land that is there's like no falsity involved whatsoever. It's just pure archaic truth, which goes along with the archaic style writing as well. And also Judge Holden's name, Holden. I mean, in an old iteration in German, that would mean like fair or gracious, which is the way that I think that he actually almost sees his actions, because it's more balanced with nature and the eternal act of violence and war, which I think unlike most modern people, he would see that as almost kind of a fair way of being, right? But then there's also explicitly German written parts in the book. I mean, that last chapter, the last heading, Sie müssen schlafen, aber ich muss tanzen. You must sleep and I will dance. It depends how someone wants to read that. And that it also seems like a kind of nod to Nietzsche, and who only believes in a god that can dance. But lastly, the Glanton gang as well. I mean, it almost seems like very Prussian to me. The Prussian mercenaries were like, the most wanted kind of mercenary throughout Europe and for several centuries. They had this archaic way of thinking, pre-Christian, pre-change of values from that time, where violence and war and high intellect were something that they possessed equally throughout, which made them very formidable foes for anyone that came across them. And so these things just really stood out to me this go around, which I thought was made the read kind of interesting.
I think that's a fascinating way of looking at it, and I also think that with the final chapter heading where it's in German, I think just the idea of using Z, I think this is also relative to McCarthy's prose, in that when we spoke earlier about the idea of him not using punctuation mark, I think it's deliberately enigmatic about what his reference is, and not just the idea that, because it's most likely that we know that the judge can speak German, so it is this idea of him saying it, or it's alluded to that he might be saying it. But I think, again, there's certain chapters I mentioned in the analysis where there are moments in which a character explicitly says something to another character, and even by the end of it, we're still completely uncertain as to who that was directed to. But I find that also really, really interesting about the relation between the Glantengang and the Prussians. That is very, very interesting. And on that last note, I just want to bring in WALLIE also, if you have anything to say to that, or if you want to make a completely different point.
Yeah, hello there. So for me, the experience has been a bit different because I did not have that much time and I'm quite impatient with books. So I decided to listen to the audiobook, and I think for me it has somehow convinced me of not listening to audiobooks again. So yeah, okay. I think what I find quite interesting retrospectively is I decided to read just a couple of sentences of the book after finishing the audiobook.
Yeah.
And I noticed the flow of it and the imagery that is created. It is somehow, I think, could be quite close to the ideal form in that medium. In the audiobook, I think you are passive, and in this book, for me, I did not, by listening to it, got this feeling that the violence made me sick or I was repulsed by it. I was just consuming it. So I think you have to read this book in order to feel the violence that is depicted. It could make you like an active participant and therefore repulse you. So I did not get that. And I also think it's interesting what Louis said about the ambiguity of the words spoken, that you don't know who said it. It's in an adaptation of a film, this would be quite difficult to translate. So I think in general, the book is probably not adaptable. And in terms of medium literature, it somehow, I think, reached a very, very high point, which makes it interesting to me to revisit it at some later point. Yeah.
Again, I actually didn't think about that when it came to the adaptation, about that innate ambiguity that's within the book. That probably is more of a difficult facet to translate into any medium outside of anything, because I even think that the violence of the book is probably doable. I mean, it would be very difficult to have, as a large scale production, to have the scene in which babies are cast against rocks and then take that to like Paramount Studios and say, okay, this is going to be in the film. That's probably the difficult aspect. But I mean, I'm looking at this now. There's practically everyone in. John and Tyler are currently sat in the audience. If you want to come in, by all means. If you want to turn off, if you want to turn on your mics, everyone, and talk, and we can figure it out. I don't mind how we do it. But so that we've got some idea to try and craft a theme about it. All of us, aside from the pros now, no one has mentioned the kid. Everyone has mentioned the judge.
Yes.
So that's probably a good kicking off point. So if anyone would like to kickstart and give us a good synopsis about what they think the judge may represent, you're going to have to fight for some space here because someone's going to speak first and we don't know who. So let's...
Yeah, let's
if you've got a point, you can try and raise your hand and we'll... Okay, George, there you go. He's got it.
Oh wait, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
What like kind of like maybe like need to reflect about like what type of person like I am like while reading this book is that Judge Holden is so intelligent. He seems to know basically about everything from history to science to music, dance,
Yeah.
literature, everything, and that makes him so like so for me personally that makes him so charming. Even though he's depicted like a fucking giant albino, like 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 okay, this guy got something going on here. I'm not like no, I'll talk to him. Wait, them. He's like he's like leading a bunch of like like motherfuckers scalping Indians for some governor in some town in like southern U.S. In that, so what my point here is that like evil can be so seductive sometimes because
Yeah.
I do see Judge Holden like as an
Mm.
representation of absolute evil, like as demiurge type of figure. Because evil cannot like show itself bare. It needs to put on like a nice outfit, a nice makeup, you know. And like intelligence is one of the best ways to like mask how terrible you can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Esteban, you've got your hand raised.
Go on.
Oh, your mic's not on.
Oh, are you serious?
I hear you.
I can hear you. What the fuck?
What the hell? Okay,
Can you
okay.
Oh
I'm
my
trying
God.
to. Let me see.
mystery.
Okay, how about now?
Can anyone lip read?
I can hear you.
I
I think
can
you
hear
might
you.
have muted
Okay,
them.
can you hear me?
I can also hear you.
I hear you.
Oh my God, it's just us. He's just muted us. Hold on. How dare
Can't
you?
hear
Wait.
him.
Okay, can all of you hear me?
Wait, I cannot hear Esteban. Oh.
I can hear
Wait,
Esteban.
I
Wait,
can't
how do
hear
we-
you.
I hear you,
It's half and
Esteban.
half.
Wait, go on.
Yeah, I hear him too.
What?
Yeah, I can hear everyone, just not Esteban.
What?
Oh my gosh.
What is this
Wait.
prejudice you're doing?
Yeah, is it some trolling?
What's going on?
Oh, it's because
Wait.
I'm a
Is it
Mexican,
trolling?
isn't it? Oh God, the
Wait, go.
Wait, hold on.
The
Okay,
judge is
can
still
anyone
here.
else not hear Esteban, or is it
I
just us?
I cannot hear him.
I can hear
Okay.
him.
I can not hear him.
Okay, so like 3 or 4 can't hear him.
Half and half.
Esteban, what have you done?
I don't know.
I think you're
Who's
chosen
the
ones.
discriminator now?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Let's just
Yeah.
switch chats. Like we go with whoever can hear him.
Okay,
we can go in one
okay,
chat
do
and
you
you
know-
stay
yeah.
here.
Yeah, Jay might be right. Like, would it work if we just all went to the chat room? Would that be better?
Let's go.
Should we go
Honestly,
over there?
Do that, and we have like an open conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's just
Yeah,
do that.
let's
'Cause I
do
think we
that.
got the introduction
tried
out
this,
of the
we
way.
tried.
Yeah.
No,
Fuck
I
this.
mean I like this a lot.
Honestly,
to
I was
start,
so scared the
but
whole
now I
time
can
doing this,
open
like,
up.
because I'm almost
Yeah, yeah,
recording
right.
as
Yeah,
well.
let's do that. Let's move to the to the Patreon hangout.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's all migrate.
No, just
You
go
mic-
back. Yeah.
We're all mic.
Okay, where are we? It's
Hey
nearly
everyone, can you guys hear me?
Here.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Here.
can hear you now.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. The judge was unfortunately taking over my soul. Yeah, but as speaking about the judge, J. George, I wanted to say I'm so happy you mentioned the idea of intelligence because that was part of what I was thinking of with the judge. I think is that, yeah, obviously a symbol of evil, but I also think a symbol of the potential for humanity in both its pros and its cons. Because I think that, for one, that there's some debate I've heard a lot about, especially in terms of theories on who the judge is and how he's like a representation of the devil and how you can see it as like a retelling of Genesis and stuff like that. But for me, I personally think that the judge, like, even though like there's a few times where I'm a bit kind of iffy, I am firmly in the belief that he is simply a mortal human being and that he is someone that I think any human is capable of, because I think that it makes it more and more interesting. I think it makes it so that it talks about this idea of the absolute apex of humanity, where it's not just like intelligence, but it's culture. It's like this almost this twisted sense of quote unquote wisdom that he spouses upon everyone. And I think that what that says a lot about in terms of his character, I think, is like the absolute worst sense of gaining everything. Because I think, for me, the judge, like in terms of his surface level traits, I think is what every human should strive for. In that you really have this sense of learning about everything, really being accustomed, being well spoken. Like I feel like it is almost like being a god, where like that's the closest we can be. I think is to try and learn everything, and I think that it is possible. I think like the impossible is an aspect of humanity that I think it is prevalent, that I think like humanity can strive for, and we've shown. That's why I'm always thinking about the idea of how we always idolize artists, and we always idolize like intelligent people that seemed like when they talk, they seem to just feel so above everything, that they feel like they've gone on this giant journey. And I think that's what the judge has. And I think I think in a very just world, like, in terms of good and evil, I think goodness, like in terms of the context of that, comes from allowing this type of wisdom and knowledge to be shared, to like allow the entirety of human society to thrive and to have this balance, and to always gain knowledge, and not only that, but also just a sense of helping people. But what makes the judge like borderline, yes, objectively evil, pure evil, is that he uses that knowledge, he uses this idea of being cultured to try and suppress and oppress anyone, to make sure no one can reach what he does. Like I think he does have this egotistical mindset, like this god complex, where because he was able to be fortunate in gaining all of this, he now feels like he needs to make sure no one is able to do that. But yet, in a strange way, like that's interesting though. Like this idea of him being an oppressor, I think he is oppressing, like not just like with violence, but also with knowledge, with being a manipulator. Is that I think he always tries to go off on this idea that the fact that he does these monologues, it's like he feels that he himself is the only one that is able to speak on this stuff. He feels like and that's kind of ties into the idea of the god complex, is that because it's him and him alone, for him, it feels like, since in his mind, since he's the only one who can do it, why, like I think that's the big thing for him. I don't think he ever imagined that anyone else can reach to his summit. And I think that shows a lot, like not just with him, but just with history. I think history is something where I think there are people that are genuinely cultured, genuinely intelligent, genuinely have some form of wisdom, but their main flaw is their own selfishness. Like in the words of Harold Bloom, I think that he kind of tries to emancipate his own selfishness in a way, to just make sure that it's him and him alone. And because he's in this like environment of the West, I think because he's so drawn into that, because he's so in this environment of the West, of this vast landscape of like just the outlaws and the vast desert, to him, I think that's like, I think he is a product of his environment as well, in how, because like in comparison to everyone else, he stands out. I think he is someone that I think shows, like, to put it into conclusion, like he has, I think, the best aspects of humanity, but like he just uses it in the worst possible way. And I think, yeah, it is a like a kind of a, why am I forgetting the word? It's a it's a showcase. It's a representation of the absolute worst path a human can take, with all of that, quote unquote power that we as mortal humans can possibly achieve.
Yeah, I think the irony of it is that like the judge is still in a way some kind of apex being, but there's this idea that because humans are also part of nature, that the apex being is innately a predator as well. If anyone else wants
Like
to say,
that.
because it's going to be a
I
lot
have
different.
I found it interesting that you say that the first words that you say about him are intelligent and using the word wisdom, because he's also like really full of shit. And the first time that we meet him, he blatantly lies and we know it immediately. And so I really didn't trust him at all. And maybe that his intellect is more in his rhetoric rather than in his actual knowledge of things.
Yeah. I want to mention something real quick about the Moby Dick comparison because people do that a lot. I remember Luisa was talking about like how Ahab has mythologized this white whale, and sure, there's ambiguity around Moby Dick, but in actuality, it's probably just a normal white whale. And
Okay. We're gonna have to make another book club about Moby Dick, though.
Very much disagree.
like, there's also, but like when people read Moby Dick, they're like, okay, Ahab is kind of crazy. But when you read Blood Meridian, McCarthy has kind of turned the reader into Ahab. Ahab. He's turned him into Ahab.
Freudian slip there.
So because because like we'll see the judge, and obviously we know that the judge is like this evil entity. However, a lot of people walk away from their first reading like, oh wow, the judge is this supernatural being. So it's kind of weird how like despite the fact that we think he's evil, we kind of play into how the judge wants us to view him. And that's very I don't know, that's sort of an angle I just thought of right now. And I don't know if that was McCarthy's intention, but
Well, I have something that kind of ties what you just said with what Rebecca also said, which is kind of about the judge's rhetoric. Because there is this idea, like I am also relating to what Esteban said, which was that I'm in the camp that the judge is a mortal man. He's a mortal being, that there is no divinity within him, that there is no supernatural quality within him. However, within that, McCarthy spends the entirety of the novel on this. He doesn't feel as though he's imbalanced, but he is walking that very, very precarious balance of the divine with the material. And there's a moment that Rebecca, is probably in his rhetoric that he might be full of shit and everything. And Gordon just said that it is just a white whale. I think that there's a moment in which, if we are to believe in everything that the judge says and that he is just a man, I think that he is aware that the reader believes that. And there's a moment in which he lays everything out, that the war is God, of all of his intentions, because by the end he's saying that he's speaking directly to the kid. But the enigma of the judge is that he's like Hamlet. In everything that he says, he means the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And the moment in which they find that small meteorite on the ground, and everyone finally is kind of on board with the judge by this point, and they're all leaning in to listen to him. And then he picks up this meteorite, and they all want to know what the answer to it is. And he says, the mystery is that there is no mystery. After he has just woven this entire tapestry of history. He knows that symbols work on a deeper level with normal human beings. Even if he sees himself as an apex being, he's still aware that even though everything might be material, there still is this symbolic nature, which is a kind of truth. He just happens to navigate it. And if, for instance, in the penultimate chapter, he says to the kid, what is it? If man has no will, then he's nothing more than antique clay. But the fact is that may be the case. Man may just be antique clay. He just happens to have been able to become this master of rhetoric and symbols, where I don't think that the two things are mutually exclusive. He may just be a man, but he may also be more than a man in that sense.
I actually really like what Gordon said, though, about the idea of McCarthy transforming us in a sense into Ahab. there's this almost like we are also, while we're reading Blood Meridian, we are also in a quest to kind of figure out the judge, just like Ahab is trying to capture the essence of this divine white whale, which I won't say is just a white whale, but this is a topic for another conversation. But I do feel like we do become a bit of Ahab. We become, like, in Moby Dick, we have that sunrise speech where Ahab is just basically talking about the quest in itself and what it means to pursue something. And I think in a way we feel like that when we finish the book, because Blood Meridian, every time I read it, it's always staying with me. It's a book that I will think about it, and even before that, before and after those almost 7 hours of conversation we had, we were also debating the book in the house, like during breakfast, doing everything. We were just like talking, is the judge supernatural? And we came back with multiple theories between the two of us, and ultimately in the end we were just like, no, he is human, and that's what's sinister about him. That's what's terrifying about him, is that he sees himself above, but he is not.
Put it this way, even if we come to the definitive conclusion and we all were to agree that, okay, the judge is a human, mortal man, we would still perhaps still have even more questions for him about what he is, about him being this uncategorizable thing, and in which sense, at what level do we then have to concede that the symbol of what he is and the symbol of what all these things are more reality? Now, we've spoke for a long time here, and we've spoke for 7 hours, so please, someone else come in.
I think you're kind of touching. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Go on, Space Cowboy.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, it's interesting. And I was just thinking mainly relating to that about specifically, there's one passage in the beginning of Genesis that has always stuck in my mind. It's quite famous, of the whole God created man in his image. And I've been thinking a lot about this in particular in terms of when I read that and I think about the implications of what that means in terms of the human species. I think of either two things. Either I think of how we can be as divine as God, or God is actually as human as us. And I'm actually thinking I prefer the latter. And the reason why, I think that it just shows so much more potential for the human species. And I think that it's because of how we are able to actually show that we can reach.
You ever heard of Jesus Christ? You'd like him. You ever heard of Jesus Christ? He did it once, actually, in the sequel.
God. Yeah, but like, it's interesting. Yeah, like I'm thinking, yeah, but in terms of that, why I believe the latter is because I think, like, one, okay, like, yeah, that means we have to think about the idea of the possibilities that we can reach, but also I think it's a hopeful symbol that God is as human as us, because that means we can all have some form of God within us, which means that we can be something. We can be enigmatic. We can have mysterious qualities within us. We can all have these traits. We can all have these like these knowledge and these ways of looking at the world that, in a sense, they do feel very odd. In a sense, like that's what I've been thinking a lot is how, in a sense, we always think that we live in a normal human world, but if we just stop and think about it, like just the actual nature.
Buenos días.
Sí, buenos días.
¿Qué pasa?
Go ahead.
Because I'm about to finish how.
I actually wanted to go next too. Go ahead.
Fuck. Okay, fine. I lost my train of thought. Fuck.
Sorry. That was a conspiracy.
No, you can go. Like, I'll probably get it back.
To immerse you in the content real quick. With regard to the judge and his perspective, like nature supernaturalism, I think that Lewis was touching on sort of the way I feel about it at the end there, where even with regard to Moby Dick, I guess Kinotherapy or Gordon, right? Textually speaking, like yes, the Moby Dick is just a white whale that Captain Ahab has a he has a he has this like strong desire to subjugate the whale, an obsession. But I think where I think both Blood Meridian and Moby Dick are more concerned with more of the bite of the narrative comes from the analyzing the subtext, which is where I think it's so much as even if he is a real man, it's what is he or what does he represent? In which in Moby Dick, and how does that representation? How is that convey the? What does that mean about the relationships that he has or the things that he does in his conflicts? And so, even if Moby Dick is a white whale, through reading Moby Dick, I think that we see, and I think this of the judge, the same way that Moby Dick is sort of at least Captain Ahab's in the story, this embodiment of the natural world, in which Captain Ahab wants to subjugate that last piece. That is his obsession as a person. And I think that relating to the themes of the story, I think that Judge Holden, he is. I mean, me personally, I don't really think he's normal. I mean, obviously he's not normal, but I don't even think he's a person. He's sort of like this mythical figure, and as this like, because I like to think of him in a literary context, and he in that context, I think of him as the embodiment of the natural world, the same way as Moby Dick, which he is telling the Glanton gang about, in his little soliloquies about like what the natural world actually is. And I think that ties into the overarching theme of the book, like I kind of alluded to with Heart of Darkness earlier, that the natural world is ugly and atrocious and terrible, and there's no escaping it. And it destroys and subjugates everything around it. And you said that the viewer is kind of like Captain Ahab, and I really like that, because I feel like, if you're a normal person, you have a disdain for him because he's a horrible person, disappearing children and such, and of many things. And but I'll just finish up real quick. Your disdain for him makes you want to destroy him, but in the end, you have to acknowledge that he is what is. And I also thought before you mentioned that, I think of him as a mix of Moby Dick and Captain Ahab, in the sense that he's also out here trying to, with his little notebook, he's trying to subjugate and acknowledge all parts of the natural world, right? He's trying to control it all under his permission.
Yeah, so I have to echo some of that. In terms of viewing, if we want to understand the judge, I think we have to kind of go on his court, because it'll really skew things. If we look at him in the sense of some kind of modern rationality and morals, then he's just going to seem, well, I mean, I wouldn't really like him. I wouldn't really want to be around him either. But we just see him as this disgusting, evil force. But Judge Holden, while I do think as a person, I think the reason that he comes off as supernatural is because he's just one piece of the eternal state of becoming within the cosmos. He's no different than how planets are formed, or how mountains are formed, or in his scenario, how he can dominate another human being, or his wish to dominate other aspects of nature, as he is just another part of that nature. And because of that, especially with our modern sensibilities, it's hard to understand him. And so then he becomes this kind of inhuman-like figure. And so I can see why that would create this supernatural element within him, when really he is just pure primordial man. And when you look at him from that angle, he's not looking at things as being good or evil or anything like that. Everything is just a series of opposing forces. And if you cannot grow and thrive, then he will destroy you, which furthers his own growth. And the child or the kid at the end, I hate to keep bringing this back to Nietzsche. You know, there's this stage of metamorphosis within Zarathustra. You become the camel, lion, and then the child. And the child is this eternal state of, you know, no boundaries, no ideological boundaries or anything like that. Because what can a child do? A child can do anything in their mind that it dreams of. And we have a literal child or the kid within the film, but Judge Holden has already reached that state long ago. And he ends up dominating what the kid could have become, but couldn't, because he operates in a different moral frame. But Judge Holden has no respect for that moral frame. It's purely a matter of opposing forces, in which case the kid ultimately, you know, does not win out.
I want to touch on that if I could jump in really quick. I'm curious to anyone's thoughts on it, but I think, Lewis, you said in your deep dive, you briefly touched on the possibility of the judge and speaking to the men around the campfire, almost like the Last Supper.
Mm-hmm.
And Louise, you said that you didn't think he would be subversive in that way, and I thought maybe if he did use that as some type of illusion, or not as a means of being subversive, but as showing contrast between a Christ figure and the Satan figure. And I also wanted to bring up the card of the devil and the tarot. The thing I'm trying to reconcile with that is the judge and the idiot that he carries around with him. This idiot that has absolutely no thoughts of his own, no way of thinking. He's completely formless in that respect. And near the end, he's walking him around naked with a chain around his throat. And I see if I can turn my camera on here. You can see that picture. And I'm wondering, because in this version of it, the Marseille, these two are like androgynous. So I wonder if the kid is what the devil, the judge, is wanting to bring him into this unholy trinity here.
Together with the idiot, you would say, I suppose.
Yeah. And the kid has no form for the longest time. It ties in also to his card reading. He gets the Four of Cups. The hand offer. He's offered. We don't know what. He's offered a chance to either leave this or this is the offering itself. And at the end, not to push forward too much to the end of the book, but like the kid survives so many things and even escapes the judge and also misses the opportunity to capture the judge as Toadvine kind of urges him on, or the ex-priest does. He seems to have learned nothing towards the end, in my mind. He has this opportunity of growth, and then he comes back to that cosmic embrace, like the devil finally gets to embrace that, or to realize his own trinity, his own unholy trinity, if that makes any sense.
It does. I actually really like your reading here. I'm interested in that because also if you see towards the end, and there's going to be a spoiler a little bit for those who haven't finished reading, but this idea of the judge is also, in a sense, feminizing himself. He has the parasol. He creates this idea, this ambiguity. And I like what you said about the formlessness of the kid, because by the end we have him as a man now, like, and this stage of his life. And if you look at the card, because I got print of the card here, I'm also looking at it, and you see that both the men and the women that are tied to the devil card, they are also creating in themselves characteristics that are of the devil. So they have a little horn growing, they have hair in some drawings, and the devil is then also with human characteristics. So there is this almost like this cosmic imbalance and this cosmic dance. I totally get it because of the Trinity in Christianity as well, especially the way that us Catholics look at the Trinity and the coming of Christ to us, becoming man, so then to reaffirm God also. So I actually really like what you said. I find it very interesting. Yeah.
I feel like Holden is almost like Christ in the sense that he is a man. He might have some sense of supernatural qualities, but he is flesh and he can be killed. And I find that interesting. And also, this might be a small thing, but like in this card, towards the end, when I think he buys a hat off of Toadvine, he has to cut. He cuts it off, and he basically only has this top. And other parts, he stuffs leaves over his head to protect his bald head from burning in the sun. So it just makes me. I'm sorry.
Could you also maybe infer that the parasol that he's holding, I mean, he has something in his hands right there as well, isn't it? I like that a lot, actually. That's very interesting.
Yeah. That's all I gotta say.
I wanted to touch up on something you brought up because I wanted to talk about it, which is his dominion over the idiot. And there's I guess to begin is that there's the fact that the women of their enterprise, I guess their camp, not their camp, but that are in the camp that they operate, they dress up the idiot. They essentially turn him from. I saw that as like turning the primeval man and trying to civilize someone. Obviously, he's like, he's an idiot. So he's still like, and the judge saves him. But more importantly is that there's this motif of loyalty where men have dominion over beasts, as God would tell Adam in Genesis, where Glanton feeds the dog, and the dog is always loyal to him. The Glanton's dog, and then the doctor, who first is like the proprietor of the crossing, also has a dog that's very loyal to him, and they perish together, right? They throw Glanton and his dog in the fire together. But the one who had it, because like you think of the visual in your mind that they have their dogs on a leash, so to speak, or we would, whereas the judge has a person on his leash. It's like the next level up, and he has dominion over other people. So when those images are kind of like in my mind, I think that that's a relationship of the ideas there. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was that I think, much like, again, Moby Dick, but how many times can we reference this, is that it's almost like everybody, in the same way as Moby Dick, was doomed from the beginning, from the second they interacted with the judge. The same way that there's like these analyses of like the way that they enter the Pequod in Moby Dick is like, it's not just volunteering, it's like making a deal, a contract for your soul to accomplish this goal. And like, that's why even though, 20 years later, 21 years later, the kid was never going to be able to escape the judge. It's his fate. He made the deal, right? He made the deal to gang up with the judge. And so that had to, the chickens had to come to roost on that one. The other thing is that, like, another way that I think you could see it, that I think we've been kind of like tacitly touching upon, was that he, if the judge embodies what we imagine to be like the apex human, or the apex person, right, in terms of intellect and stature, he's like how planets form, but he's this one in a billion, the greatest, the apex of the Homo sapien, let's say. Then what does that say about humanity again? If we look at it this way, that it uses its intellect and strength to again try to subjugate the entire world,
cultivate evil to its
I don't think he is the necessarily apex. I mean, my reading could be quite superficial because I only listened to the audiobook. But for me, it feels like I wonder why the judge is doing what he is doing. And for me, it comes back to him being thrown in this world where he has basically, it goes back maybe to God, being thrown to the world and having no purpose. And I think he kind of recreates being God because he otherwise would be powerless, and he has to gain all the power. So he becomes this extreme of a person that is just, doing everything to stay in power, just so that he can feel like, not just a vulnerable human. And I think the kid is kind of the opposite. He's this innocence that the judge is trying to corrupt, because his version of himself that he has created, I think he needs some affirmation that what he's basically doing is the correct path, because he's so he's quite sure of himself, I think, and he's converting all these people to his religion, basically, to somehow also affirm himself. Yeah, that's basically my way, but I don't know if that's.
Do you really think
in
the
book.
kid is innocent though? He's kinder than most people in the book.
Yeah, I
But-
don't
but
agree
he-
with
I
that.
think he's the most innocent.
Yeah, but
I
he's
guess
getting
by
into like
default.
being violent even before he meets the judge. Also,
I feel like he's the most virtuous.
But that's the nature of a kid, I think, and a kid does not know what he's doing. So to kid, everything is a play, and only later on the kid realizes what pain there is.
Can we don't go to the kid yet? I really missed the stage and stuff that we
Go
had
on,
before
go.
with raising hands. It was pretty good because I still have some takes on the judge, and I think they're more boring than
Me
most
too.
people say. So I want to bring it up before we go. I don't
I
think
just wanted
he's.
to say real quick, to what Wally was saying. Obviously, the kid's not innocent, but he was saying, most innocent. I think the difference I see between the kid and the judge is the kid is thrown into an environment and starts becoming a product of the environment, where Judge Holden seeks that environment, and there lies a massive difference between the two.
Yeah, I agree.
I would
And
also like to pose a question whenever whenever time allows about the judge.
Yeah, you can say that after Jay.
Jay, go on.
Yeah, I think he's not one of the in the billion. I think he's not pure evil. He's just a human, and he's pretty much 1% of human, or even more. I think he's just a psychopath. It's a boring take. There's definitely more layers to it. But one of the boring explanations is he is a psychopath, and it's at least 1% of humans are psychopaths. Some studies, up to 30% of humans have some qualities like that. If you look at any CEO, if you look at any cult leader, they are really charismatic. People follow them. And I think the terrifying part of the book and terrifying part of the life on Earth, I think, is that it's not that the judge is terrific and people like that, but that we follow them. I think the whole gang and the kid, and that the people like psychopaths like Judge corrupt us, and we follow them. And I think that's more scary part. So it doesn't mean that there's 1 in a billion that humans that are bad. It's not 1% that are humans that are bad, but it's maybe more like 80 to 19% of people, because we follow them and we do what they want. And why Judge does it and why Psychopath does it, like one of the explanations is, it's not explainable, science still exploring, we still exploring as a humanity, but they really strive in chaos. If you look at any conflict, like during the wars, during any dramas, during things in companies, like the CEOs of the companies that I mentioned, they strive on it. They take other people as a blood bags. They take other people as just drive for themselves, and they strive in this chaos. And I think this is how the kid becomes a blood bag for the judge, and other people become the blood bag for the judge. And either they become psychopaths themselves, or they die out of exhaustion or whatever.
So
I think it's
would
boring.
like to add something to that quite quick. I think it's a very interesting take, and I think it's quite relative to what goes on in the novel also. But I think that my immediate response to that would be, so why is it that we are so enthralled, and why is it that there's a symbolic nature with a character like the judge, whereas someone else who is a psychopath, which is Galanton, doesn't have this mythos behind him?
Because it's a book. and it makes it way better, and it tries to play at the more cosmic scale, but to the more human level, the scary part is that this, I don't think it matters that much, like in the bigger schemes. As a book, it's really nice, and it plays with more divine, it plays with more cosmic things, but if you bring just like one level down, the reading, it's boring. I mean, there are multiple readings to the book, and I think on the most boring and the most terrifying level is just the reality, and it's quite normal.
Because I think Glanton comes off more as a wild card, and the judge is more calculated. So, I don't know.
I think the judge oozes meaning, like the Jesus figure that we are curious because he somehow seems to so strongly believe in what he does, but we don't understand why, and we try to figure it out to understand that if he may be right, and I think that's why we are drawn to him.
I think it's that to me, the judge represents, the burden of consciousness and choice. That what defines us is, while he is certainly a violent man, and while he is certainly a dangerous man, I think what defines me for him is that he chooses everything, to the point that he does not let anything else choose for him. Like, he's an albino in the desert, completely covered up. He does not allow his environment to make a choice on his body. And I think that what separates him is that so many of the characters in the book represent not non-choice, but the desire for the end of choice, the desire to follow something mindlessly. And if there's evil in the judge, it's that he does not allow for a choice outside of himself, even if he's lying. Even if that choice could be something that's bigger than him, say the meteorite that falls to Earth that threatens to supplant his place because it could be a new symbol that's larger than him. He must relegate it to, just a tin object.
Yeah. It seems like we all kind of got our frills about the judge out.
I got
an hour
one
and a half.
Brian's got one.
What were you going to say?
I guess
I have a burning question I want to ask about the judge.
Yeah,
and I really
wanted to
want
hear your
everyone's
question.
opinion on it before we move on.
Yeah,
If that's all right.
And then Brian, yeah.
Okay, this is one thing that kept coming to based off the judge's appearance, is that to me, the way he was described, he seemed like a hairless, giant, bald man. I was thinking of like a giant baby, almost, in a way. You know what I mean? And the whiteness, the albino, is like purity. You know what I mean? That's the way I took it. So, like in our purest, childish form, we are evil. And he knows all these things because, like a child, he's very curious. So he wants to know all these things. Maybe there's supposed to be like some parallel with, he's trying to make a parallel with the child or something because he's a child. The judge looks like a giant child. And then I was thinking like a Clockwork Orange, the film, because they're like 15 years old. They wear white and they're very like destructive and, like chaos and stuff like that. And then even Alex is into like fine art and stuff like that with like the Beethoven and all that stuff like that. You know what I mean? He could come off as very, what's it called, educated or what, however you want to say that. But that was my reading.
I think you're looking for the word cultured.
Cultured.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. I mean, like, it's interesting, like, because like that's kind of a similarity I got with Alex. Like, that's definitely why, if anything, like the character of Alex was what got me into cinema, because like it was like, not to say like literally me, because like I never thought of that at all, but just in the sense that like I was just so enamored by him, and it felt like he was, in my like 14-year-old mind, an apex of humanity, of how like I liked that he was cultured. I liked that he seemed to have this like own form of language with the Nat set, and yet I can understand that, of course, he uses that like eccentricity for violence. He uses it for the worst possible means imaginable. And I think the reason why we are all so drawn to it, as I think I said before, is that we all have the capability for something that we can consider not quote unquote normal. We may say that normal is part of humanity, but like a lot of things, it is a construct. Normality is something that is only made when everyone confines to it. If we really look at humanity at its rawest form, like any one of us can be seen as something that is so abstract, and like just the idea of having this life and having this, like, going on all these ideas, it makes it on a pure primal level, it may seem quite abstract and absurd, but we just use our, like, our standards, we use our sense of like a status quo to depict that this is normal, and this is seen as something that is truly abstract, which then again I do think is also a necessary thing, because it gives us this balance where if we didn't have a sense of quote unquote the norm and what is considered good, everything would just be anarchic. Everything can be considered as equal as can possibly be, which includes violence, which includes doing the worst evil actions you can possibly imagine. And so yeah, it's a bit of an oddity, this idea of normalcy, because I guess like the judge, it can be like, his I think his primal traits of being cultured, having to actually learn the languages, being a fiddler, doing magic tricks, like what is, like, he's just so equipped with everything. Like, yeah, to me, on a purely primal level, that's the only thing I really admire about him, is that he's taking advantage of living, of just doing everything that he can, except that, again, as I said, he is using it for the worst possible things imaginable, because he probably has in his own mind that he's the only one that can do that. But then again, that's because, like, he's the only one in his environment who, like, there might be many judges, there might be many humans that we can consider of as abnormal, that are able to be seen as these prodigies or these masters or these wise sages. But for the judge, it's him and him alone, and that is his only downfall. And that's the downfall of a lot of people, I think, eventually, with evil, that eventually prime evil like that will be stopped. But, like, I think it will just come down to the fact that it is a cycle where we'll always have these people, we'll always have those that think of them as so high and mighty, and unless we have the self-awareness to know that not only do we need that sense of like normalcy, but we're all capable of such great things. And I think I said this on Notes from the Underground, on how the idea of gifts, and how gifts that we have should be used wisely.
Tyler, I to get Tyler's point across, because I know Tyler's been waiting to ask a question for a while. So just before we change topic.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to ask. I was actually thinking about kind of like, as we were talking about the judge, and like whether or not he is this supernatural or otherworldly kind of being of those qualities and stuff. As we were talking about it, I actually recalled talking about a brief little discussion that me and I believe Gordon and Jason had last night about the film Halloween. And it kind of got me thinking of, like, I know John Carpenter tried, and like whether or not that was successful ultimately is to be determined, but I get the feeling that the one thing that stuck with me when I first saw Halloween and was exposed to the character of Michael Myers is, like, he tries to, in a sense, try to blend the lines between, is Michael Myers an actual person that's just evil, or is he the embodiment of evil? And I think back to, like, the line in, like, in the original Halloween of Dr. Loomis talking about, as soon as, like, he went into his treatment of Michael Myers as, like, he thought that he could cure him, but after a while he figured out there's no way of doing that, because what he saw behind that boy's eyes was pure evil. And so and I know that future films in the series play with that idea of like, is he supernatural? Is he not? And it got me thinking, like, in the same way, is the judge, and I want your thoughts on this, is the judge kind of using the same like trope of like blurring the lines between humanity and supernatural, as far as like him being being the embodiment of the ideas of like war, and like is he more of like a manifestation, like a physical manifestation of the idea of war? And what really got me thinking about it, like throughout, like you could definitely tell throughout the book, but like the last little paragraph of the very last chapter, I'm just gonna read a little snippet of it. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and sachets backwards and throws back his head and laughs deep in his throat. And he's a great favorite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddles and priorets and makes a pass, two passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow and is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. So that really got me thinking of like, kind of like the idea of like him being the embodiment of like not so much a physical like he's a physical manifestation of the idea and the reality of this world that Cormac McCarthy builds throughout the novel. And I was just thinking, like, do you think that is there any sort of like, does this kind of comparison hold any water? Because I just thought that was really interesting. I really want kind of your thoughts on this.
I think in terms of being the embodiment of evil, I think Holden is that symbolically in terms of the story. But I think in terms of, if we look at the narrative as it is, I don't think it is that it's that abstract. Like, it's like, in terms of the literal manifestation of the story, I still think, he is someone that is a man. But in terms of the narrative, in terms of McCarthy's style, like, yeah, he is used as a symbol, a very powerful symbol of the unstoppable force of just the pure evil. Because I think like that thing
I would say, sorry to interrupt, Ed, but just adding on to the point, I would say that, funnily enough, that it's kind of a combination of what both you, Tyler, and what Jay were saying. I've never seen the two as mutually exclusive within the book. I think that this is the giant threat of the judge, because I mean, the finale is, he says that he will never die, in the sense that, in the same way it was mentioned previously, he's completely white in the desert. He wills this into existence, but also just as the abstract concept, in that he will never die. Ultimately, he never will die, because the idea of what the judge actually is something more eternal.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the idea that he can still be both a man and just a psychopath, as Jay said, and those things do exist, in the same way that, of what Tyler says, of that he is the concept of war, and because of that he will never die. And I think that this is the endless enigma of the judge, and it's why we see him as this larger than life character that looms throughout literature, is because even if he is definable as one or the other as both, the paradox is that he is never definable precisely because of those things.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think that's what Harold Bloom, when he was talking about the ending of the novel, was like alluding to, as this idea that he's responsible for many of the horrid things that are happening in America today, because it's not just that it's his ideology, it's an ideology that I really do believe it's like, yeah, it's a human ideology. And that's what I've been thinking a lot about, is how like everything, every sort of idea, every sort of story that we have, the fact that us human beings were able to think about that, I think makes it the most human thing imaginable. I remember, this is going to be an odd comparison, but like, I remember a very long time ago, me and Space Cowboy were having this conversation, and we were talking about the Logan Paul Suicide Forest, and how for me, and how I was so emotionally affected by that when I heard it. That's actually the fun fact. That's actually the first time I ever heard of Logan Paul was through that incident. And for me, I thought it was pure evil. I thought it was, I said in my quote, inhuman. And Space Cowboy was talking and like trying to bring his thing about how I was saying it in a very emotional state, because it was a sense where I was only saying it through my lens of morality, because I think it is true that I think evil, the fact that humanity is able to have a dialogue with it, I think makes it the most human thing imaginable, because I think it goes with everything. Like the fact that, even when we think of like the ideas of humans being related to things of supernatural, the fact that it is of the human species that is connected with that, the fact that like the humans like are always intertwined with these things, with everything that is considered part of our reality. Like I think no matter what, it is like it will always be connected to something that we will call human, or in the sense normal. That's the fact that we always will engage with this stuff. Of course, that's what makes it timeless for a narrative, but also it does speak to a truth. It does speak to, I think that is why I call it a bit hopeful, not in the traditional sense where it's like like a happy catharsis, but just in the sense that I now feel so like very like happy to know that this is something like evil. The idea, the construct of evil is always going to be in humanity, because just like with everything, the fact that we have been in contact with the ideas, that's what makes it the most human thing imaginable. And I know that for me, now that I've seen, like this might just be the most bleak, evil story imaginable. Now I know that, like, what could be just a personification of hell. Like in terms of visually, I always just imagine that, like the whole story just looks like a horizon. The whole landscape is an eternal horizon where you can see the absolute red, which is in hell. And I know that because I've experienced that, because that's the apex of a certain extreme. Now I know that I'm going to use that as a reference to know, where do I fit into all of that? Where's my level of morality? How evil am I? How good am I? What do I do that I think is right, and what do I do that I think is wrong? And I think there is a genuine comfort in that, to know that you've gained that sense of perspective where you don't just hide away in terms of thinking that you can never be this, you can never be that, because the fact that that's why it is important that this should be a historic book, that this takes place in a historic time when the book was written, because the fact that this is a form of history means that it is something that is never ending. And while there is many things that we can say that is fearful of that we will never get rid of it, I think as long as we keep to ourselves and are acknowledging that yes, it is there, but we don't have to fully be consumed by it, I think is give me a very positive feeling that me personally was very hopeful in the long run.
Could I elaborate on this too? Because I'm curious what others think about this whole hope and hopefulness. Because I see it as the man mentioned on the personal level, but I'm kind of in the same camp. But at the same time, me is not others, and there's still people. And
really quickly, when you're done, I would like to ask a question that might change the subject.
Okay. But I would still wanted to hear maybe some people have more on hopefulness before we change the subject.
Okay.
I don't personally find it hopeful at all. in any account, I think the world that he creates is a very good description of hell, and almost as if everyone that's in this state has already gone to hell, and they're doomed to repeat this again and again and again and again, and he is just taking them through the ride again and again and again and again. I think for me, it's such a stretch to find any kind of silver lining, if you will, any kind of hope. Not outside of the book, but within the book. I don't read into any kind of hopefulness at all. It makes me very sad. And not that I didn't know these types of things about humanity before this book. It's just you're forced to really go through it, and you're forced to reconcile atrocities that like it's been said, a myth that some people put their whole hearts and lives into believing that, and they have that framework to build upon, and when that's taken from you, and you're taken back to that primeval state, that you're nothing more than the sum of your impulses and desires and so on and so forth. I don't see it as hopeful personally.
The way I saw the desert setting was as if, like, what if you took everything, stripped the world back, and just left humans up to their own devices? Like, what would you get? I guess it's this incredibly violent, like primal thing, I guess you could say. And
very Hobbesian, that we're all evil, and you know.
And I have oh, go ahead. Oh, I have something quick to add. Isn't it strange that the judge isn't his name isn't capitalized? It's almost as if it's like his character's a little understated the way it's like written. I mean, like just like looking at the word. I mean, is that strange to anyone else?
It's informal almost.
What was that?
I think it's interesting that he picks and chooses for nouns what he capitalizes. There's instances in which God also throughout the novel is capitalized, and sometimes it isn't.
Interesting.
Can I ask my burning question?
Yeah, go for it.
Can I just say like a sentence or two before we change the subject? I just wanted to bring it back to like what Esteban was saying about normalcy, and because currently we live in a relatively non-violent times compared to like previous decades or centuries. Obviously,
the Pax Americana.
Obviously, down, but yeah, and sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, but like basically back then, like if you lived in medieval times or way before that, violence was showing mercy to your enemies was seen as a weakness, and squashing your enemies was virtuous. So, and it kind of demonstrates that normalcy that humans have. It kind of reminds me of the Zone of Interest, where this Nazi family will present themselves as normal, but they're carrying out these heinous atrocities. And I think that really drives home the point that McCarthy is saying about violence, is that violence is innate in humanity. We have not denormalized it, we have demoralized it. It's still in our nature. So it's kind of like, what do you...
Thank you, Christian. I think.
I think Space Cowboy is what you wanted to ask a question, didn't you?
Okay, I didn't mean to end it so abruptly, but what I wanted to say was that I wanted to talk about the parable of the harness maker, because that's like my favorite section of the book besides the end. If everybody wants to do that,
go for it.
And I was gonna leave the floor open as to what are your impressions on the parable of the harness maker, teaching in parables, just like Jesus, by the way. And what do you think it means? Well, through what all the characters go through, because there's a lot of twists and turns in it, but it ultimately ends at one place. So, what do you think about the parable of the harness maker? What do Lewis and Luiza think of the parable of the harness maker first? Because in your 6.5 hour video, you talked about it a little bit, but I want to hear what you think about it thematically and the characters involved and why they do what they do literarily. I suppose. What is it? It's a parable.
As in, like, as the story within the story. let me think now. Because I'm very attached to it, but I'm also attached to it from the perspective that I always think about that parable as the judge manipulating the congregation around him. I think the most interesting part of that story actually is the moment where they see the hearse and the procession coming from outside, and then for some unclarified reason at that point the judge looks up at everyone almost to gauge their reaction, because that's the point within the parable that the tone shifts and it becomes more of a moral tale. And the most interesting element of that was that part to me where the judge looks up at that moral shift and tries to gauge the reaction, and then he starts to smile. And I always felt as though at that point the judge made a conscious decision to actually change the course that parable takes, because he pauses for a moment, and we don't normally see him pause or hesitate. But in terms of the actual parable itself, I think that it's more of a judge monologue in that he's kind of playing with the symbology of the coins and whatnot. It relates to, you know, how like in the final chapter where he's speaking to the kid in the bar, and it's as though he's laying out all of these layers of all of the people that exist in the bar at that moment, and he's describing their history and how they ended up at that point, and nothing really doesn't happen for a reason. My idea for the tale of the harness maker, the idea of the coins and whatnot, is the judge laying out all of this almost arcane symbology directly in front of us, and there's certain symbols that we pick up on, like the idea of the sun that's scattering bones of his father and whatnot. We have immediate connotations within that, but I just think that it's almost as though the judge is exposing like a margin, a percentage of this accrued knowledge that he has, and he's just gauging the audience for how much they'll pick up on. Because if he were to expose all of the layers of symbology within that tale, we wouldn't know it, even though it'd be right there in front of us, if that makes sense.
I see. It's interesting. So you take it as the judge being dishonest to those around him, and I think to before throwing it back out again, because it seems like where this is getting down to, especially with how I analyze the book and everybody else, I would preliminarily ask also, when you're talking about the parable of the harness maker, think of the parable and the judge's explanation of the essence of humanity and history and materialism. And I want to ask, does anybody agree with the judge? Does anybody conceptualize?
I do.
So do I.
Yeah.
And that's why I know
Do you mean like in regards to the parable, or just
I've inherited the heart of darkness. I brood, but yeah. In general, like, yeah, his pessimistic. I guess we've talked a lot about relativism and normalcy, like you just ended the note on, but you know, if you agree with the judge's thesis on humanity, right, that it is the essence of humanity is to war and to perform atrocities to one another for the sake of power, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes him so threatening, because most of his stuff is related on this absolutism of war is God, of that the only ultimate truth is life and death. And he even says, you know, moral codes and history, when it's put up against war, it becomes superfluous. And I think that when you see how history plays out, and the only ones that can continue to exist on the world are those who are victors of war, the people that are descendants of the victors of war, it becomes a very difficult thing to refute the judge on that. And if you did disagree with him on his tenets, then I don't think that he would be a threatening character at all. And I think the biggest threat about him is that everything that he spouses is very difficult to refute.
Yeah. I feel like the judge's goal is to be the greatest human, in my opinion. He wants to be intelligent and cultured, and he has accepted the hard truth that violence is a part of being human. Therefore, if he wants to be the apex of humanity, he has to embrace that with everything else.
I also think it's part of survival instinct of viewing, because the whole part is we even hear it from the story of the hermit in chapter 2, where he talks about the animals and nature aren't evil, only man as this machine can be evil.
Oh my god, I
then
love that part.
yeah, but then it's this idea as though I mean this is probably my biased view as well, because this is just how I view things in the world. But I think that one of the modern struggles is this obsession with people trying to separate humans from nature, as if we aren't a part of nature in and of itself. And there is an element of the judge that is this idea of, is nature entropy? Are we hurtling towards our own destruction? And him enacting this the entire characteristic of the judge could be, in its most simplified manner, an animalistic survival instinct.
I like already where this conversation is going, because obviously, like I've already mentioned, I agree, and for all those same reasons, and I think those are a lot of the themes of his character. And yeah, like man in nature. I think there are direct references towards him saying, that about the natural world. Again, Moby Dick. But the other thing is that I can't help but think, like on the other side of the coin, almost ironically, or maybe as part of the play of the literature, is that there are so many sort of motifs of destiny throughout the book as well. All with both, the motif of the meteor, right? The shower at the beginning and the end. Also, kind of like what we've alluded to before, how it seems as though the judge had for them ganging together and doing this to other people, they have also doomed themselves to the horrors of mankind. Them, wreaking this havoc upon others also brings horror upon themselves, which I think is antithetical to some of this point if you analyze it that way as well. Of course, ultimately the judge still wins, but perhaps that's another, I guess, theme of the book, is this humanity's constant fight with the judge. So as opposed to thinking of the judge as the essence of humanity, the essence of the worst of humanity that is able to be overcome, although the kid doesn't.
He also has this aspect of the collective shadow, because we often talk about the collective unconscious, right, of humanity, and this idea of those symbols that we all share through culture. But I think we talk very little about this collective shadow that we all share as well. And I think that's why when we were talking about the tarot readings, there's something so universal about those images. They are this like story that we can just infer through symbology. And interesting enough, like yesterday I was listening to Dawkins debate Jordan Peterson, and that made me extremely uncomfortable, because it felt to me like a conversation that would go. Sorry. Oh, okay. It felt to me like a conversation that would go nowhere, because they were embodying it. One side just someone that was drunk in symbolism, and the other side someone that was drunk in materialism. And in essence, like the judge, the interesting aspect of him is that he is both. He is pure materialism. So in a world in where science and nature reign supreme, he would still be able to be overpowering over all of us, just because of his sheer stature and his sheer desire to submit us through violence. But in a world of pure symbolism, he would still conquer. So in that essence, he has this. I think he, beyond just being pure human, this human collective shadow, he also is in himself a theodicy, like the questioning of evil and the necessity of understanding evil in itself, right, beyond the powers of God, and why suffering exists.
Oh, I see why you like Carl Theodor Dreyer. You like talking theodicy. Yeah.
Carl Theodicy Dreyer.
I went back and forth on myself about whether I thought of this as a tale of theodicy, because in the middle of reading this, I also helped somebody with some assignments on Plato's Timaeus, and the big brain analysis of the Timaeus is that it's not an introduction to Plato's metaphysics, but it's actually Plato's theodicy of why there is like imperfection and evil in the world, compared to so I was trying to think about this book in terms of it being a theodicy, but the more I thought about it, in terms of an anti-theodicy. But it seems as though this pendulum is what the book does to me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
this conversation, and so yeah, and that's all. That's all just one character and his interactions into the world.
Does anybody know Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter?
I'm sure
I don't
someone
watch
will.
Hunter.
I don't watch
Yes,
Hunter.
yes.
Because
Well,
to me, this is probably the fictional character that the judge reminded me the most of. Hisoka is basically a character which exists in this world of Hunter x Hunter, and he purely enjoys fighting. He just exists and tries to find the strongest opponents. And there is the main character, which is called Gon. He is a kid, and at the beginning he's quite weak, but shows a lot of potential. And Hisoka is the main driving point for him to become stronger. And Hisoka wants him to become stronger and lets him grow and eventually fight again and so on. But that's what the judge reminds me a bit of, this idea that if there is nothing to basically fight to survive, then he has to create it himself.
I've never really had. I mean, because I don't want to reference Moby Dick again, but I can't really think of a reference to the judge in anything else that feels as an appropriate comparison. Because I mean, like even say just on a. I mean, while we're on the realm of anime, just on the realm of an impactful character that is able to manipulate someone like Johann Liebert from Monster. But again, it's something else. It's something where it's the imposing facet of the judge, and that's why I describe him as an apex predator, because on the layers of symbols, he may just be a man, but ultimately, if he is just a murderer or a pedophile or a rapist or this destroyer, even within the animal kingdom, he falls into some categorization of this beast, of this monster, which even a Johann Liebert, which is another kind of apex, it's a different kind of category.
That's a great comparison. Just because he's testing the same things the judges of the Glanton gang, except Johann is being more direct, right? He puts the doctor to the test, right? He antagonizes him for his morality.
The interesting thing is, I think it's that Johann, in essence, as well. He in the story of Monster, he also becomes a myth in a way. He becomes someone that not just his story and in the end of the anime and the manga, but inside that space, like the way that the characters reference him, he becomes a mythology in itself as well, which is interesting with the way that he manipulates everyone.
Literally a shadowy figure, right?
Yeah.
Like behind everybody. He's kind of like like you were referencing the unconscious, and he almost visually, the way that he manipulates people, he's almost portrayed as the shadow beneath the mind.
Remember, Urasawa does that in Billy Bat, and he does that in 20th Century Boy as well. He always has these characters.
I love 20th Century Boy. The kid is also friend. I mean, not the kid. The friend is also this mythical character.
It's interesting that we're bringing anime and manga into the conversation, because I one of the unadaptable stories that I think of, and when I think of Blood Meridian, and it's very out there, it's Berserk. This idea of these characters also that are pure evil and pure goodness. But in Blood Meridian, I don't think that we actually get the sense of the kid being pure. I think we spoke about that for a little bit briefly, but I think the kid is potentiality, and he represents choice in so many ways. That's why also the Four of Cups is also important in that sense in the tarot reading. But I'm not necessarily sure that by the end he is pure goodness, that he actually chose goodness. And I think the cosmic embrace that I kept calling that hug that happens in the end chapter, that I don't know necessarily if that was just an imposition from the judge and how much was that received from the kid. Not getting too much.
I like the video, what you were kind of saying at the end about like maybe the story is palindromic. It ends very similar to where the story begins between him and the judge. But it's interesting that you mentioned Berserk also, because one of the things I think about the kid is that while he might not necessarily be innocent, I do think that the kid, I kind of said it earlier, but I do think the kid is like the most virtuous character in the sense that he has these 3 seminal acts of mercy. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention how the judge has knowledge of his second act of mercy, right? That what is his name? The guy that he doesn't execute in the, to take him out of his misery or whatever.
He leaves him, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what's his name now?
The judge
is it Shelby? Is it Shelby?
Shelby? Yeah, Shelby.
Yeah.
Shelby. The judge is aware of that at the end. And I remember the character with him, forgot who it was who was with him, was like, Glanton, he tells him that Glanton is never going to forgive him for doing that. Yeah. But, and the most consequential act of mercy is he doesn't want to kill the judge.
Yeah.
Right. And, but at the end, I think the story with Elrod is very important because the kid tries, like you mentioned, that like the kid probably sees a lot of himself inside of Elrod, and he's trying to tell him, he's trying to dissuade him from the way he thinks about life, basically. But when Elrod takes that to offense and tries to kill him, the kid kills him in defense, And what would a character like the kid, I whenever I think of a paragon of virtuous violence in a horrible setting, I always think of Guts from Berserk, and his perseverance of, and what makes him who he is. Someone who's not also not necessarily innocent, but is someone who exemplifies the virtue.
Yeah, I have a quick comparison actually. I have a comparison with this idea of I know I said Guts killing Elrod, the kid killing Elrod at the end. Is there another comparison that comes to mind with that is the idea of the judge, and I always see it, and funnily enough, Space Cowboy, you mentioned it earlier, the constant reference to when the idiot is in the water is that the judge saves him, and I've never seen it as the judge saving him. And what I initially thought because we go through Blood Meridian and seeing so much violence and seeing so much immorality, and there is still this moral center of the kid. And for me, the big question is whether that remains at the end. But the only instance that I can see it remaining is because we're trying to put into context, and I think I mentioned this in the analysis as well, is that our protagonist has just shot a young child that is orphaned, and we're trying to still figure out whether it's moral or not. But the one comparison that I think that hinges on is this idea of, is he saving him from himself? Because the comparison of when we see the idiot going through this baptism with this quasi-baptism with these women, and it's the first time that we hear his name, even though he's sinking under the water, there is this blissful quality to it. And the last thing that happens is that the judge, quote, saves him from death, and we all know what continues to happen to the idiot. He's just this blank canvas for the judge to continue to mold. So I think that there's a parallel with that of the act of, not in the complete misanthropic sense, but that the act of living in this world is more of an immorality than the act of murder, than the act of choosing to kill someone, in the sense that the kid is
excellent way to put it.
It's just I think because I do believe that McCarthy, and I believe the same, that what the judge spouts is probably true. Even if none of the cosmic level is true, still that thing that he says, if man doesn't have this, then he is but antic clay. I still think that this holds a lot of sway, and I think that McCarthy probably agrees with that, and it probably agrees with, the calamitous advance of the sun, that we are just constantly hurtling, that we are animals, and our instinct is to destroy one another. But there is still, it's like in the Brothers Karamazov, this idea of, God may not be real, but the one that believes in God, the one that still espouses those beliefs, there is still goodness within, and that still trumps all the actual, quote, truth that exists within it. And I think that this is probably McCarthy's perspective of, yes, the world may be hopeless. And although I understand like Esteban's point of where hope emerges from outside of the book, I still think that within the novel, the world is hopeless, and it's probably reflected in McCarthy's actual worldview, but it still doesn't quantify the kid or virtue not existing in this world, even if it is hopeless.
It just says that they lose.
Yeah.
In the end of this story,
Yeah,
it's similar to the end of the road, right? At the road carrying the fire. Go ahead.
I mean, what is more of a idea of goodness losing is that in the final chapter, I'm actually curious to hear everyone's interpretations of the final chapter as well. But in the final chapter, all we know is that we last see the kid go in, and the only person that emerges is the judge, and the judge is dancing. All we know by the end of the novel is that the judge, and if you believe,
or a judge.
Yeah, exactly. But in some manner, a judge reigns supreme at the end of the novel. But there is something about it that, even though this is the case and an evil incarnate reigns supreme, that the kid in some manner must still exist, even if it is, from the opening chapter under the Leonid's meteor shower, that he's destined to die, that he's destined to be the sacrificial lamb. He still must go on the journey. George, go for it.
About the 1 second. It's about the epilogue, because I really just did not understand one word about it.
Okay.
Can we speak about it later?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, while we're on the topic, I'm actually curious to hear what then everyone's interpretation is of the final chapter, of the ending, the finale of the kid and the judge.
I think it doesn't matter if it's a judge or the judge, but the thing that's not very hopeful is that the judge continues, and whatever evilness or / whatever corruption of humanity continues. I think that's
forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, I mean, we have hopes, like we have those kids and people trying time to time to stop the cycle. And what we talked about this before, about the war is forever, and then only the victor stays, and then you continue the war, and then you cannot fight violence and then be because the violence is going to prevail and so on. At some point we can stop. Like in theory we can stop, and this book shows like, yeah, maybe we had a choice. The kid might have stopped it, but probably didn't. And maybe there is a hope that its point is going to be stopped, or maybe it's not. It's going to continue forever. And I think that's a wonderful, ambiguous ending to the book.
Well, yeah. I have not finished it, but from what you guys are describing, it sounds like very Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now. At the very end, when he kills, what's his name? Marlon Brando, and he becomes the new, I don't know what you call him. Messiah or whatever, the leader of the people. He becomes the new, what's his name? I forget his name, but
Kurtz.
Kurtz. Yeah, so that's from what you're describing, that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah,
I referenced Heart of Darkness a couple times, and that's because I think thematically, before the next person goes, is that I think he and Conrad are touching on this same balance between what we consider evil and what is the essence of humanity.
Yeah.
George, go for it.
Well, just going back to the nature of war, it's the fact that if anyone wants peace, whether it's a kid, whether it's just anyone, you and me, anyone in this world, basically you're gonna deal with like war either in a literal way or in like a metaphysical, spiritual, intellectual way, because there is no there's no such thing as a winner in a war, because you have to fight, you have to do awful things, and either way, either come out of it dead or alive and traumatized. The only true winners of war are the people, are basically your successors, your sons, your daughters, your grandkids, whatever. Like, so like that's like the only like hopeful take I could have about this book, really.
If your
I know
children
that
don't
one
get killed together with you.
has a bit more of a hopeful tone, but that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, but then again, like maybe like the reason why I'm hopeful is just how I am, just personally, like in my nature, is like more of an optimist. But then I in terms of like the individual, I think like it's fine that it seems like no one else thinks that, because I think it just speaks about our own individual human condition, and perhaps like because we have our own individual ways of reading, or just like reading the novel, which in turns is like examining the human condition of the world. I think it's fine, because it just means that it just reaffirms my belief that humanity is very complex, and I find that the fact that human beings, like all individuals, are individually quite idiosyncratic when we look deep within ourselves, that I think that's something that we often forget, that we all have something that no one else will understand, but at the same time, if we look back in the broad spectrum of humanity, I think that there's a lot that we like can converse with, we have a dialogue with, that we all can understand, and that can relate to violence, that can relate to love, that can relate to compassion, that can relate to selfishness. And I think this ideas of truly looking at humanity and what like makes us both individual and a collective, I think is ultimately McCarthy's thesis, in my view.
I think that's I don't know if that's shared by most people. The thing is, I haven't quite heard that before. I do see it. Even like I know I'm simplifying it to a degree, but the idea of it can't get worse than this. So I suppose there is something after.
Yeah. I see somewhere here, I'm kind of in Shoran kind of camp of, yeah, the world sucks and it's pretty bad, but you have to not disillusion and lie to yourself, and it's important to embrace it.
Yes.
Some sort of it's not pessimistic, it's not optimistic. Other extremes are not going to help you in the long term, and at some point you have to embrace the suffering overall.
Yeah. I think it's just a case of, these are the way things are. And that's also why I agree with the judge. I think that to a certain degree, I mean, whether we like it or not, there is an element in nature, and because of that, in the human condition, that might is right, and your definition of right can fluctuate with that.
Yeah, it's all these. You have the option to make a choice. All these characters made these choices, and it's funny because I never really thought much about the kid as a character. Like, I've always just sort of thought of him as more of a vessel. Even in your video, you guys were kind of like, is he the protagonist? And he is. He's like a non-traditional protagonist. But yeah, after listening to you guys talk about it in your video, I guess I never realized that like there is still significance. He's not just a blank slate. Like he there may be purity or innocence inside him. And it's also about like the choices he makes, and he does have mercy. So yeah, it was interesting to think about the kid a little more.
Yeah, I think. Go on, Jay.
I have a question for Sim to go further. So if you want to elaborate on this one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can we talk a bit more about control/choice? Because I think Luiza mentioned that in the video a bit, or maybe in some points more than a bit, but I think I would want to elaborate on this. And I was wondering if you looked at the Escape from Freedom that I recommended a while ago. And where I can mention just a bit of this, because I think it also ties down to the choice, and a lot of philosophers saying that the choice is equals to anxiety, and it's real bad, and people don't want to make choices, and that's why the kids and everybody else don't make choices. They just offload the choice to the judge, and whereas it's the whole sadness overall is that a lot of people just don't want to think and don't want to make choices, and it's easier to follow somebody else, even if that somebody else is evil or whatever.
I think a key point to that as well, it's not just the ending, but the first chapter. Like when the judge goes and he doesn't whisper, he goes in the middle of the congregation and accuses the reverend of heinous acts. And by the end, everyone is just jumping on the bandwagon, causing complete chaos. And he basically says that wasn't that's not true, or something along the lines of that, and they still buy him a drink. I think there's a level of, I don't want to get into free will or anything like that, because I think that's quite a boring topic of conversation, but I do think that along the line of the discussion, I think I mentioned loads of times this idea of the Luciferian intellect, this idea of trying to apprehend or master things in nature and control. There's many times that McCarthy uses the word geometric, or he tries to type something in. He literally draws something in a sketchbook and destroys the item itself. So he's apprehending the knowledge. He is copying that and then destroying the object itself. So it's almost like it didn't exist. It's almost like that wasn't allowed anymore because it wasn't allowed in his own gaze. And I think the judge exemplifies that. But just to bring back to the kid a little bit, there's an element of also the kid and his purity and his goodness, and well, he's not 100% good or whatever, all that we were talking about. But in some point of the story, he's gifted a Bible. Even though he's not able to read, he carries that Bible with him. There's a sense of choice in that. There's a sense of trying to, even if it's performative, I suppose, we don't really know to what degree he uses that Bible because he cannot read, but he carries it around with him. He was a baptismal candidate, and in the end, he gets baptized. So there's a level of conclusion to his story, almost like in a coming of age, even if it's not necessarily a coming of age, but a coming into greatness or goodness. And in essence, he doesn't master things like the judge does. He never learns how to read, or he masters his shadow. And if that's true or not, we get a bit of we can discuss on that as we were talking about the end and the embrace and all that. And even when Lewis mentions in the discussion the girl that goes missing in the end, there's the possibility as well that the kid himself, now the man, was the perpetrator of that. We never know is really the judge. We infer is the judge that did, right? So I think those layers are interesting to me.
That brings up another, I think, interesting point about their relationship that I wanted to talk about, which is that I think throughout the novel, it's not explicitly stated, but there's all these, everywhere they go, there's like a missing child, right? And like the family is rushing. It's like, oh, where's our child? And we get a pretty good sense that it's the judge, raping and murdering them, and which is why it's also like in the, maybe it's a bit of a horrifying thought, or maybe it enhances their relationship. But, the kid joins like their posse, who's also like a child in his midst. But he just kind of, he's there. The kid is by himself. He's like the ultimate target for someone who wants to kidnap and kill kids. Someone's kidnapping and killing children everywhere they're going. But the kid remains untouched.
I think that the reason for this, it might play into what Edward was saying about the tarot of the devil and whatnot, and I also, it may also relate into the opening chapter of the interpretation of the meteors being related to this the book of Revelation, of these two beasts that coexist. I mean, it may be that the two beasts are serving the judge. It may be that the judge is one and that the kid is the other. But I think that in relation to control of what Jay was saying also, there is this idea of, there are those moral acts that we see come from the kid that we don't see anyone else. And that suggests at some degree that he does have some idea or some agency that he has. Even after in chapter 15, he goes when he gets separated from everyone, and he has that moment with the burning bush and everything, and he comes back, and like Jay was saying, everyone just kind of falls into and does what the judge says, and that's a really interesting aspect of the novel. Is that, I mean, part of the adaptation would be you would have to convince an audience, if this was a film, that the judge, being this 7-foot albino baby, is able to go on these massive tangents with almost illiterate people, and no one is going to do. They're just going to allow him the space to exist, which is kind of a lack of a choice that they also have. So it suggests that they don't have agency, and the only person that does really have agency is the kid, because when he returns from chapter 15, he then tells Tobin, who is, I mentioned he's like constantly whispering in his ear, he says, "I'm not scared of him." And it's as though the implication is that the judge knows that the kid is supposed to be scared of him, because clearly everyone to some degree is scared of him, and he's aware of this because the judge knows everything. And these acts of defiance, I think, are the apotheosis of this would be for the judge to convince and mold the kid to understand that he is the only one that has free choice. He has to completely recognize that the judge is correct in his worldview.
He says he's disappointed in him at the end.
Exactly.
That's exactly what my question, what I wanted to provoke, which was, I think, before you keep going very quickly, that the judge is intrigued by the kid. That's why he doesn't kill and mutilate him as a child. Go ahead.
Exactly, and the parallel that I see with that, and it might relate to the Tarot of the Devil and whatnot, is that he's intrigued by the kid, and the only other person that we see complete intrigue in is the idiot. I mean, he literally grabs his skull and he examines it. So whether these are the two people that the judge has encountered, because what they represent to the judge are, in one way or another, complete potentiality, and maybe it's the two paths that humanity can go down. You have the kid who, in the opening chapter, it mentions that he's born into violence. He is born bred with this innate knowledge of violence, and then it's never referenced again. The judge can probably recognize that in him, whereas the idiot is this other aspect of it, whereas perhaps the judge will reign suzerain over all of humanity. And if that's the case, then right here in his grasp is this absolute personification of the other potentiality of humanity, which is complete subjugation, which is a complete blank canvas. I mean, whatever the judge is doing, he will have control, and he does by the end of the novel. It's an inevitability. And so even when he speaks of essentially like the idea of the kid taking his place, of say metaphysically becoming the next judge, is that no matter what, that is still an element of control that was instigated by the judge.
I think you're right, because now that you mention it, it's like these two things that he's fascinated in, like you said, they represent potential, and also it shows how one is like a passive, dumb, sort of blank slate, very primal, right? He's like a primal man, and he's like a caveman, so to speak. And but the kid, I mean, he's a child and he does all these things. He demonstrates this precocious nature, right? He has incredible potential as well to sort of, he has a will to do these things at such a young age. And I think this judge is this plays in. So I think you're right that the judge is intrigued. These are the two things that he wants to. He wants these to be his experiments or his vassals in the world. And like I said, he's disappointed by the kid in the end, or at least that's what he says.
I want to touch real quick on just the brief moments when you see the kid has skill naturally doing something that I think relates to that very well, and how either Toadvine or the ex-priest asked him if he's ever mended something before, and he's like, "No, I ain't never touched something like that." He's like, "Well, you got a knack for it." And I think small instances like that show where the judge would have interest in, like, an apprentice, for lack of a better word, like having great potential and skill and knowledge in something without even having been taught, any of it.
Well, there's something else as well. Is
and
that,
with a pistol. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was literally about to say, like towards the end where they're fleeing from the judge and he's with Tobin. Tobin hands him the gun, and he is just a natural with it. And there is also this idea that I mean, it's never mentioned when these onslaughts of the Comanches and whatnot are occurring. It always there's a passage where he says the violence was general, and there's only certain specific instances in which we actually hear who is perpetrating what violence. But we can't assume that the kid is just a bystander there. He must have engaged in it in one way or another. So he probably does have this inclination of a violent being.
Just
Me,
to
I
mention.
guess that yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I go? Just to mention, Jay, talking about escape from freedom as well. I was just thinking here about, and I was staring at the tarot card of the devil, and one of the things that you can notice on the card as well is that in this unholy trinity between those two people and the devil right in the center of the card, the chains around their neck is quite loose. So there's an option there to remove those chains. It's not like they're like really tied up that they cannot take it away. As much as they are mutating to this beast form, they also have the choice to remove those chains. And in the book Escape from Freedom, it talks a lot about that. The responsibility that comes with freedom. This idea that
There
a lot
are
of
a
people
lot
give away their freedom.
Yeah, there's a lot of Gnostic influences into the story. That's one of those archetypes of like the freedom of man, sort of. And what were you saying again? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. about the idea of responsibility of freedom and the devil cards.
Yeah,
No.
I remembered what I wanted to say, which is for something with so much Gnostic sort of themes and iconography, I wanted to say that the beginning of the novel has, in my opinion, I guess you could call it, there's a repudiation of Christianity. There's a death to Christianity at the beginning of the novel, with like, you know, the I think the iconography of the hanged man at the crossroads and how defiled like the place, the I guess they're in Mexico, so these would necessarily be like Catholic chapels are like all destroyed. They're in the middle of the book. Besides the idiot who goes under, there's also a baptism, and in literature, the use of water, coming up from water, is very. There is this element that it changes characters. It's a baptism. It's to begin anew, and they do undergo a baptism in the middle of the story, which is like after their first horrid exposition, the town treats them to a bathhouse and they wash away all their blood and junk, and nothing about them changes. There's like, so that's why I say that there's like this world is I think purposefully in the narrative is so anti-Christian in that sense, or Christianity is gone from this world.
I mean, the judge, to me, also can represent the demiurge. He's pure a material world. He's all about controlling the material world and allowing what he wants to allow. And that's what I get from him as being the demiurge in its form, or just an allusion to that.
Right, and his assumptions, I think, they come off as these Gnostic things, and that relates, I think, because there's also like those themes in Gnosticism about the potential of humanity, especially over the gods, and the freedom, and so the little room for your head to leave on the card is it's an interesting symbol. I never thought about it that way.
While we're speaking about the end as well, because I know George wanted to mention the epilogue, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to talk about because it might be actually the most enigmatic part of the book. I think it's the most obtuse in what it's speaking about. If anyone wants to kick it off, if they have any opinions on the epilogue, feel free. If anyone does.
I mean, I have a vague one. I feel like just vaguely that it's almost like time has passed and the myths have been built, and you have these kind of like ranchers building fences looking deep into like the horizon in the desert, romanticizing of how the West was won per se, and how it was captured, harnessed, and subdued, romanticizing about bygone eras and whatnot, and continue driving in a post one after the other, and so on and so forth. Not knowing the blood shed to arrive at that privilege that they have acquired.
I really
Vaguely.
like that you, yeah, I really like that you use the word subdued, because I think the West as a symbol in itself like represents a lot of the freedom and the fantasy of freedom that America was built upon. And I like that a lot, because there's a level of decay, and in the end they are building fences. So even if the West was I mean, if this Wild West was built through freedom, in the end they are tying themselves down to a hole, like they are making holes to create a fence. So I think there's a level of playfulness that I don't think that we acknowledge a lot in the conversation and in here. McCarthy can be quite playful with his words as well, and I think he's doing that in the end. It's very obtuse and it's very
Absolutely.
serious, but I think there's a playfulness about the decay of the West. The West meaning not just the Wild West, but the Western civilization, I think, as well.
Yeah.
I've always felt as well with the epilogue in particular. I think the only way that I read it is I just read it completely instinctually. You read it, you've gone along with this journey and you understand the tonality of the book, and by the finale, it's almost as though it's a complete every thematic has coalesced at this point, and it's similar to how the judge would try and explain to the world. All the answers are right there in front of us, but in order to understand it in totality, we have to understand everything about geology and history and death and everything that's contained. I mean, even the idea of a fence within this very, very enclosed circumference. And the way I've always read it is just going off the tone of it, and I don't try to deeply understand it. All that I feel is though, when the Mennonite mentions to them, "You'll wake more than dogs going out there." It's just this idea of like these sands, this land is ancient, and within it lie these ancient spirits, and things have just been built upon them. And there's a moment where I can't remember the name of the tribe, but there's a small village where a tribe is wiped out, and we just have this image of the wind blowing them away. And because the judge was almost as though he's the final witness of them, he will dictate that they will have never exist because history will never note them. And I just have this idea of within this sand, history lies within there, and we may never know it, but it is still there. And it's similar to what like Space Cowboy, what you were saying about when you say this idea of Christianity almost like being sacrificed, almost being killed at the beginning. I get that, but there is still this idea of how when the kid is wandering through these churches, and it is just this idea of though they may just be these husks and though animals may live there, there is on the metaphysical level or on the spiritual level something else that exists there. I think it's the reason why McCarthy tries to give human characteristics to the dead, and he always speaks of things that have been, and he speaks of natural things in the world as if they were molded by man. And so that epilogue for me is just within this land there is a story, and we are going to continue to build upon it, but as we literally press into the ground, we are creating a new story, but we're disturbing it, and that is just our nature. Man will interfere with nature and he will disturb it.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, that brings me back to the story of the harness maker and how no one actually ever knows the truth of what happened. It's all the myth that's built up around it. And those who have died in the sands or in the shadows are left and never able to, be what's the word? Dug up essentially.
Witness,
witness essentially, and exhumed and seen for what really happened.
Almost,
That's it. Yeah. That's it.
My analysis of the epilogue is similar to yours, but I think I'm a little bit more cynical in terms of the subject matter of the book, which is, I think they can both work the same, but likewise, like I think the plane, that wasteland is like the natural world in all of its time, kind of like formless. maybe not formless in the terms of how God said it in Genesis, but like formless for people to create society, and that the digger is, you know, he's like a trailblazer when people follow his lead, and building that fence. I always saw as like sort of building our place in the natural world, or you know, the fence is, you know, what can and cannot be done, creating a moral landscape of the wasteland is how I saw it. I could definitely see it also as like building just civilization as a whole, or our stories that make us of the wasteland, of the sort of the formless plane of not just the natural world, but, you know, as of history itself. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
definitely.
like civilizing ourselves and nature all at once, I suppose. I like that as well because I think he's talking about the cycle of violence, but there's something to mention about the epilogue as well is how pointless it is what he's doing because it's
Oh, yeah.
sand. So he's making holes, and those are just, if you were to do that in real life, like that is a complete pointless endeavor.
True.
Because, yeah. So just to mention that because I think it's
It's
interesting
like
again.
impermanence.
Yeah,
Futility. Yeah.
And I think that's also, I think it's just, I mean, in many ways you can kind of summarize the entirety of the novel within the epilogue also, because it is just this idea of one civilization is going to be built on top of another, and there will inevitably be another one that's created after enough time has passed, and it will just be washed into the sand, and we probably will know nothing about it, and this is just a cycle that will continue. And even the image of this desert, I always think that just the idea of putting a hole in the desert, because I think the final line is, and it's something like, and he goes on and on and on, or something similar to that, but it's just the implication that this is also a cycle. It just goes on, and he puts another one in, and another one in, and another one in, and we imagine this on the scale of the desert, that this is just the story of humanity, just a pointless endeavor forever.
Would you liken that to like the idea of the eternal recursion?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, just repeat it over and over ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like how the followers are preoccupied with, like you said, kind of like the bones of the land, as if it's also on top of, right, that which preceded it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, guys, I mean, we only made it about 3 hours, which is pussy levels compared to our analysis of Blood Meridian. But it is later here, unfortunately, in the UK, and we haven't had any food at the moment, so we may have to wrap it up here, unfortunately.
Oh god.
I know.
No.
We didn't even.
I have one question.
Hi, Leo.
Leo.
I didn't get to say anything, but I want to say one thing. Why are all the memes of Judge Holden literally memes? I don't think that makes sense.
Because people are stupid and they don't understand the character at all because they haven't read it.
Yeah, I think that's horrifying.
I haven't seen the literally memes of the judge. My favorite one was I was gonna say my favorite one that I saw. It's a casting of Blood Meridian, but it's only with cats, and I should have brought it in because that was my favorite one.
Speaking of which, I think someone said here that they were going to show their fan casting for Blood Meridian. I don't know.
It was me.
Okay.
Yeah, George.
Yeah, go.
Okay, for director. Okay, for director, I'll pick.
Oh God.
Sam Peckinpah as director.
Oh.
Okay. Marlon Brando as Judge Holden.
Okay.
Okay, John Wayne as the kid. That'll be interesting. Charles Bronson as Toadvine.
That's a good one.
Okay. Clint Eastwood as Glanton.
Ooh.
That's pretty good.
His movie comes out next week.
Yeah, sure.
Wait, really?
I know Luiza is a fan. I'll never forget one time hearing when their podcasts were on YouTube, and I think The Mule was coming out next week, and Luiza was like gushing. She's like, I can't wait to see it.
It's just a bomb.
Okay, I have two more. Actually, three more. Richard Roundtree as Black Jackson. Henry Fonda as the ex-priest, and Gigi Allen as the imbecile.
Hey, George, you know what's
Oh,
funny? You know what's funny?
That was
You
great.
mentioned Sam
Buster.
Peckinpah. Like, literally, Harold Bloom mentions him in the Wild Bunch in his introduction.
Oh,
Ah, okay.
that's
That's
interesting.
good.
Like,
who
yeah, he
would
says, like,
direct?
yeah, the quote, like, if the American pastoral tradition essentially is the Western film, then the Judge incarnates that tradition, though he would require a director light years beyond the late Sam Peckinpah, whose The Wild Bunch portrays mindless itself when compared to Langton's paramilitaries.
Ah, that's a
That's
good.
sick.
Interesting.
I
Is he-
actually have an interesting choice for a director.
I'm gonna go
Who's
also.
still,
So
who's
bye,
still
guys.
alive.
He has
I
to
have
go
an,
on.
Go ahead.
sorry, I have an interesting choice. Still alive. Werner Herzog.
Werner
Okay.
Herzog? Yeah, because he's also extremely nihilistic and basically has a chaotic view of nature, right?
Yeah,
I think that would
he's
work.
covered
And
themes. I don't know if
thinking
he
about
would.
it,
I
thinking
wouldn't
about it,
call
cosmic.
Herzog nihilistic, like, completely.
Plus, I read the beginning of the book, literally just the intro with the meteor shower. That's a pretty Herzogian image in a roundabout way.
He could be the
You should read.
narrator. Yeah.
You should read the rest of the book. It's pretty good.
As if you haven't been spoiled already.
Dude,
This was quite a
fucking read it
spoiler-free
so
discussion
bad, dude.
here.
We've been talking about it. Dude, it's literally, I'm gonna get a job, I'm gonna buy this book, I swear to God. I swear to God. I swear to God.
You know,
No, but,
there's a thing
yeah.
called torrenting with PDFs and other sites that you can do. Like you can check out.
Nah, it's okay. But I want a
Allegedly.
hardcover copy anyways.
What do you? I mean, allegedly, yeah. Hey, speaking of which, like there was actually I had two thoughts in terms of like an adaptation of Blood Meridian. First of all, like the first one I was thinking is that I was thinking a lot of like if Blood Meridian was adapted in an animation, because I think you can really play around with that idea, and I think like it especially helps with the Judge in how you can really like mold him into any way you want, and I think it will capture the message of who he is as a person really well. The second thing, like this is definitely a bias that I've had in terms of like if there was to be a soundtrack to this like story, the only thing I've ever been thinking about is just like masses, like music for masses or requiems, like especially of like a deep like male choirs. I can just see looming over it. Because like it's a bias, like if like you probably all can tell I've been a fucking Bruckner addict like this entire time, like this whole month, and like genuinely like I was like during the end parts of of the novel, I was reading it while listening to Bruckner's Mass in E minor, which I think goes so well with this novel, especially in terms of I think Bruckner, as a composer, he just allows for this giant space to emerge. I mean, also obviously because he himself was a very Orthodox, devout Catholic, and you can see it so well even in his symphonies. And I think like his style, when I was reading it, I could just feel how he just wants to just see this expansion. He wants to allow for such space to just have it be so large and long, and I think that sense of length and seeing the vastness is what I truly get in terms of atmosphere with Blood Meridian. And I feel like Bruckner's music like was really like in his masses, I think was like the perfect music when I was hearing that.
Yeah, that's cool. I thought I haven't thought of a soundtrack, although I was trying to think of a living actor now, because we know an adaptation is going to come out at some point. A living actor now who could feasibly play the Judge, and I couldn't think of anyone. Although Luiza came up with one that I couldn't top. I think legitimately, she came up with. I mean, if anyone else has got a better one, by all means. But Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, I can see that.
The physicality, like, because I don't know, he looks like a giant baby at the same time, and I don't know anyone else that has that stature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He did play a whale. I mean, is that the comparison?
Exactly.
He played the whale. He played the whale.
He should have shot both films at the same time. On that note, again, thanks guys. This was really, really good.
Yeah.
I really
Thank you
appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank you.
You know, it
Yeah.
sounds a bit
Thank you,
cliche to
and,
say, but it's like we really only scratched the surface. It really just feel like just
Yeah.
a
I
small
know.
crumb.
Oh yeah.
I know.
There was like
Well,
so
again-
much I want to talk about. I didn't even mention the whole Mexican culture thing that it was deeply affecting to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks again, guys, for everything. We really appreciate it. It's weird because it's like we're just all here, and now I've got like formally sign off or something.
Yeah.
Like, I hate this.
Like I really just wish like I could just talk to you guys forever, honestly.
Yeah.
We'll announce
Right,
it now.
cool.
Okay.
Night, guys.
Thanks, guys, for
Bye.
everything.
Good night.
Guys,
Goodbye.
pleasure to see you guys.
Okay. The recording will be done soon.